Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was early spring outside. The snow was just beginning to melt, but all the puddles were already in streams, around which the children were running merrily, shouting and laughing. They all had paper boats, and some were floating real wooden boats made by their fathers or grandfathers on the weekend. Near a large tree, from which large drops of melting snow were falling, stood a tall for her age girl of 8. She looked longingly in front of her. She didn't have a boat. Her mom was at work, so she couldn't make one, and the girl had no one else, not even friends. They had recently moved to a new house, and she hadn't had time to get to know anyone, but she loved to go out. But it's hard to have fun when everyone is playing and laughing, and no one wants you. Molly sighed and pouted her lips in resentment. On a bench a little away from the brooks and trees sat a short old man with gray tangled hair and a gray-brown cotton jacket. On his feet were very shabby boots that must have been cold. He looked at the children with a smile, then shifted his gaze to the girl and lowered his head sadly. After a few seconds, some idea came to the old man's mind. He jumped up from the bench and rushed somewhere towards the house. He knocked on the door, and a stout, tall woman with a ladle in her hands came out onto the porch. She asked the old man something menacingly, but when he explained what he wanted, she shook her head and went into the house. After a few seconds, she returned with a piece of paper. The old man nodded gratefully and returned to his bench. He began to roll the paper into the shape of a ship. He was doing it very strangely, in a special way, and even managed to attract the girl's attention. It should be recognized that this old man was one of those who, with his kindness and charm, could attract people to his side. He was helped by everyone to whom he turned for help, whether he managed to relieve them, or he could choose such people who would not refuse help. No one knew, but everyone helped, and he never refused if he was asked for anything. Christina, who lived in a house on the edge of the street, was an old and infirm old woman. She was so weak that sometimes she couldn't carry heavy bags home, but Gary, the old man, was always there to help. Christina often brought cutlets or soup to his semblance of a house in an abandoned school building. Molly watched the old man with interest as he rolled up the ship. When he finally finished, he smiled kindly at the girl and beckoned her over to him. Molly's mom was always telling her not to approach strangers because they could hurt her or take her away from her mom, and Molly had always obeyed her mother's instructions, but not now. The old man's good-natured smile, curiosity, and desire to play with everyone made her head for the bench. The old man silently handed the girl a small snow-white ship made of thick paper, almost cardboard. It was unusual, not like the others, big with sails and a mast. Molly did not know that such a thing could be made from an ordinary piece of paper. Her eyes lit up, and she looked at the old man as if he were the wizard Goodwin from the story she had read last weekend. The old man nodded at the creek, near where the children were playing, and smiled again. The smile lit up Molly's face, and she ran off to play with the others, as if this ship was a ticket to a world of friendship and children's games. Contrary to her wish, the girl did not put the ship on the water. She felt sorry for it. She ran with the boys, refused to exchange with the boys who offered their handicrafts. Molly had gotten attention and a willingness to play with her. She didn't need more. She turned to see that old man again, but he wasn't there. The bench was empty. Molly looked sadly at the ship and ran home. She would definitely keep it, no other way, because it was a gift from a real wizard. At home, Molly waited impatiently for her mother, who had to come from work in the evening, about 5 o'clock. The girl was so impatient to tell about the ship that she forgot to eat and did not even turn on her favorite cartoons, which went only on Saturdays and only at this time. She kept running to the window to see her mother's red coat or her blue beret, but her mother was delayed somewhere. When the clock hand went past 5, Molly began to worry. She would not leave the window. Tears almost came to her eyes. She remembered that Daddy had also failed to show up once, and she was afraid that it would happen again. But luckily, this time her fears were in vain. Molly's mom, Jennifer, came a half hour after the promised time. Molly threw herself on her neck, not even allowing her to put the bags on the floor and take off her shoes. "What's wrong?" Jennifer exclaimed. "I thought you weren't coming as Daddy." Almost sobbing, the girl said, "Sweetie." Jennifer hugged her daughter and squatted down. Molly, like most children, was often dramatic, but she was quite resilient. Her grudges for the rest of her life usually ended after a series of her favorite cartoons or after a scoop of ice cream bought especially for her. Now she wiped away her tears with her sleeve and smiled broadly. "Look what I have!" The girl shouted and ran off to her room. Jennifer smiled and shook her head, trying to get her boots off before her daughter arrived. Molly came running in just a few seconds later and held out a snow-white craft to her mother. Jennifer took it in her hands and bowed her head. She scrutinized it carefully and came across an embossed inscription. It was almost illegible, but there it was. The woman awed and backed away, not knowing what to say. "Honey, where did you get it?" Molly shrugged her shoulders. "The old man on the bench, he made it for me." "What did he look like?" Molly wondered. She wasn't good at describing people, so she could only name clothes. Jennifer handed her daughter the grocery bags and asked her to sort through them, and went to her room. She sat down tiredly on her bed and sighed. She couldn't believe her eyes and still thought she had imagined it. Jennifer reached into her locker and pulled out an old shoebox from there. She carefully removed the lid with trembling fingers and exhaled noisily. She hadn't had to open the cherished box in years. It was filled with junk, as anyone who opened a shoebox would say. But for Jennifer, it was the only thing that bound her to her quiet parents. Or rather, so she thought. Jennifer's mom, Susan, was indeed dead, having died of cancer when the girl was 13. Her father, on the other hand, had gone missing 3 years earlier. At 13, Jennifer was left alone, the benefit of being raised by an aunt, Jenna's father's sister. She was younger than her brother, unmarried, and belonged to the type of people who believe that nothing could be better than freedom. So she never restricted her niece in anything. However, her upbringing too, she was not engaged, preferring to write memoirs, go to modeling shoots, and celebrate contracts with her lovers, which were at least 6 for the time that Jennifer lived with her. Except only the last one had lingered for 2 years, along with her son Michael. Jenna had never treated her niece with warmth or anything like that. She just didn't care for the girl. Occasionally she would walk into her room, look at Jennifer aloofly, nod her thoughts, and leave. At 18, she subtly began to hint that it was time for her niece to do the honors, or she would be too long in someone else's house. From then on, Jennifer started living on her own. She had been working part-time before, saving money for the future, and now she began to live on her own. 16 years ago, a 13-year-old girl sat on a narrow bed with flowered sheets. She was holding a ship made of paper. It had masts and sails and did not look at all like the ones children played with on the street. She looked sadly at the ship, her hand trembling. "What are you doing with this toy? You are not 5 years old." Rolling her eyes, asked Jenna, who leaned against the door and looked at her niece. She was a tall and thin woman with long curly hair and a very pretty face. The woman preferred to wear expensive brand-name clothes and put on good makeup. Jennifer, as a child, often heard from her mother that it was unknown where she got the money for all this from. She never had a normal job, occasionally selling her graphomaniacal writings to publishers and receiving modest money for photo shoots as a model. "My dad made me this." Coping with her emotions, the girl replied and hid the ship in a small shoebox that stood next to her. When the lid was in place, Jennifer clutched the box to her chest. "Your father hasn't been with you for 3 years now. There's no telling where he is." Jenna shrugged her shoulders. "It's about time you started living your own life. Even though your mother, it didn't work out." Jennifer looked at her aunt with hatred and clenched her teeth. A storm of emotions rose at her because of mentioning her mother in such a negative way. The girl realized that she shouldn't quarrel with her aunt, with whom she would have to live for a long time, but she wasn't going to listen to such statements about her mother. "This is the memory of him. Only he made ships like this, I know, because no one else had them. He'd leave his signature by crumpling the sheet in a special way. Would you like me to show you?" Jenna raised her hands, shook her head, dismissed me from looking at the old paper. John was always scribbling something when he had nothing to do and sticking it to others. The look Jennifer directed at her aunt startled the woman. She chose to remove herself from the small room, leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. There could be no mistake. It was indeed the same ship. The side was crumpled and stamped with the same illegible letters as on the old yellowed piece of paper. Jennifer folded the 2 ships and closed her eyes. "What if I'm just making this up to myself?" The woman shook her head. For over 19 years, nothing had been heard from her father. It was as if he had fallen through the earth, and now, after all this time, Jennifer was seeing the same ship. What if it was just a coincidence? But Jennifer didn't believe in coincidence. She believed in fate. Maybe it was her desire to have at least one loving relative, except for her daughter, of course. But she was too young to confide her worries to her. Jennifer had never been an optimist, quite the opposite. Life didn't give her moments to believe in miracles or happy endings. First her father disappeared, then her mother died, and she was taken in by a self-obsessed aunt. At 19, it seemed that life was finally starting to get better when a young girl was in law school, she got a boyfriend, and they started living together. Then it seemed that everything would always be fine, but fate, or evil doom, never left Jennifer, only gave her a little respite. And now, years later, in her life again happened grief, the usual familiar grief. The woman was glad she had her daughter, but she was very afraid for her. Molly, in essence, was all Jennifer had left, and the tiny chance that her father was still alive had lit a long-lost hope in Jennifer's long-lost soul into a faint flame. "Molly?" shouted the woman, removing the box. She had never shown it to anyone, ever, after that day at Jenna's house. It seemed to be something private and intimate, something to be hidden and not given to anyone. "Honey, come here." Molly ran into the room, her face smeared with flour, certainly not escaping her mother's scrutinizing gaze. Jennifer looked at her daughter with that maternal look that made it impossible to lie. Lowering her eyes, Molly confessed, "I dropped the flour." "The whole packet?" Jennifer gasped, remembering that she had wanted to make cheesecakes this morning. "Why'd you get soaked?" "I thought I could clean it up before you got home." "Kids," the mother thought and shook her head. For a second the heavy thoughts disappeared from her head, and she looked at her daughter with a smile. Molly was the only ray of light in her life, and she wasn't ready to lose it either. "Okay, let's deal with the flour. You better tell me, where was that old man who made you the boat?" Molly sighed and tried to explain the place. Jennifer had grown up in this town, so she knew the streets and nooks and crannies well, but even she had a hard time understanding the place from her daughter's clumsy and somewhat awkward description. The garages next to the mini village? Jennifer shrieked when she finally realized. Molly shrugged. If that's not them, I've completely forgotten the town. Molly didn't understand half of what her mother was saying, so she just nodded and pulled her by the hand into the kitchen. Come on, I'm hungry. Oh, you've been hungry all day. Will you have rice and a cutlet? The girl nodded and rushed into the kitchen. But let's get the flour out of the way first. Jennifer grinned. A heavy sigh sounded on the cool spring street, close to a small settlement. Or rather, it was not really a settlement, but a part of the city where private houses were preserved. When the center and most of the districts were given for the construction of high-rise buildings, the inhabitants of this part of the city refused, and there remained a settlement of private houses. It was very small, but because of the heavy traffic and the large amount of trees, it was frequented by teenagers in the evenings and children during the day. Jennifer had no idea how her 8-year-old daughter had found the settlement when it was quite a long way from their apartment. The place greeted the woman with familiar fresh air and a view that hadn't changed at all. It was worth saying in the 10 years she had been out of town, the township hadn't changed the most. If in the city there were new stores, buildings, schools, and kindergartens, here stood the old grocery store, where probably still worked a tall, full Clara, who never tied her blue apron. Jennifer and her friends often ran behind the garages or sat on the village's shriveled playground. Besides, there were a lot of abandoned houses here, just a teenager's paradise. There were streams and puddles everywhere, but Jennifer remembered the way to the garages. She knew she wasn't likely to find anything there, but it was worth a try. Then she intended to ask around. In a place like this, everyone knew each other. Really? Jennifer grinned. The garages hadn't changed at all, except a little more dreary than they had been 10 years ago, and they were still standing close together. There was a path in the middle that teenagers ran around on, and one garage had an old 9-wheeler on it. No one knew how it had gotten there, but it had been there since before Jennifer had moved in with her aunt. Out of the corner of her eye, Jennifer could see the bench where the old man was sitting, according to Molly's stories, and in the distance there was an old oak tree, its branches spreading out for many meters, where the girl was standing. Jennifer looked around more carefully, hoping to find some hint of the old man who had made the boat. "Girl, you shouldn't stand where cars drive." A loud, very sonorous male voice sounded behind her. Jennifer turned indignantly toward the man and opened her mouth to say what she thought, but she failed. "Michael, you?" "How?" Standing in front of the woman was her long-time and not the most pleasant acquaintance. He could be categorized as the type of memory you don't really want to remember. Tall, blonde, and very pompous. Oh gods, how much Jennifer wanted him gone like her father had once been, without a trace. It had been her ultimate dream at 16. To meet him now was a complete surprise to the thoughtful woman. "I live here, but how did you end up here? That's the question." The man grinned. Michael was a year older than Jennifer, but had been in the same grade as her because of his father's many moves. He was in the military. A year after Susan, Jennifer's mom, died, Jenna had gotten together with Michael's dad, and the boy had moved in with them. Or rather, he moved in with Jennifer, because he lived the next 2.5 years with her in the same room. It had been a bloody, awful 2.5 years. Jennifer preferred never to remember them. 13 years ago, a tall, blonde-haired guy flies into the room and throws his backpack right on the floor. It's light, hardly any textbooks in it, but it hits the leg of a girl who's sitting at her desk trying to do her homework. It's worth saying, Jennifer has always studied hard, tried to get good grades, but lately, because of having a named roommate, she moved out to study, so she had to do her homework when no one was in the apartment. Michael liked to hang out after school with his buddies. "How many times do I have to ask you not to throw things in the room?" the girl asked angrily, not turning around. She had already started looking for her old headphones to isolate herself from Michael's chatter. Yes, it was his favorite thing to do, talking while Jennifer was doing her homework. He pissed her off all the time. "This is my room, too, Prickle, and you need to stop worrying about order like this apartment is yours." Jennifer couldn't take it anymore and turned to face the guy. "You know, no matter where you are, throwing things on the floor, talking loudly all night, is unacceptable anywhere." Michael grinned and tossed a tattered tennis ball from one hand to the other. "You're too right, Petite. We're 9 months apart." The girl mouthed offensively and went back to her algebra homework. The headphones were finally plugged in, and Jennifer could no longer hear Michael's annoying, mosquito-like voice. Not long after that day, Jennifer lost her headphones. More correctly, they were ruined by Michael, who was tired of the girl ignoring his words. Jennifer even cried then. And now, many years later, Jennifer stood in the garages and looked at that same annoying and nasty face. Of course, they weren't children anymore, and Jennifer had long since become a mother herself, but childhood resentments don't just go away. That made her feel a kind of nasty suffocation on her soul, as if an encounter had occurred that she didn't want. In spite of her feelings, however, Jennifer smiled. "I've recently moved here." Michael shifted his gloves into another pocket and grinned. "I thought you had an apartment downtown, didn't you?" "I sold it." Jennifer replied briefly. "And no, I don't want to talk about what happened." The man grinned, the familiar dimples appearing on his face. He was standing quite far away, but even from that distance Jennifer could see the familiar light in his eyes. "Do you want to come in?" "I don't live far from here," Michael asked. "Or do you have something to do?" "Next time I will, but now I have 44 minutes left before my shift starts, and I have to find the homeless man the 8-year-old kid described." Michael's eyes widened as he looked at the woman in surprise and grinned again. He didn't seem to understand anything, but he was insanely curious. Who was the homeless guy? Jennifer didn't know if she should answer Michael, because she never liked him and only did nasty things to him, but she judiciously described the situation briefly. She was moved to this act by the realization that without the help of a local, to find the old man will be very difficult. Besides, Michael, like her, was an adult. It's foolish to lose a chance to find a possible father because of childhood resentments. "So you're looking for the man who made your daughter's boat?" "I won't ask why, but I can't help you yet. I just bought a garage here, so I don't know anything or anybody. But I'll be sure to ask around and see if anyone knows anything." Jennifer nodded gratefully. She hadn't expected to be so lucky. It was the first time fate had taken pity on her, it seemed. Considering it was Michael, though. "Give me the number?" said Michael, and Jennifer looked at him uncomprehendingly. "I'll call you if I can find it, or do you want me to pigeonhole you?" "No," said a hurt Jennifer. There he was, the real Michael, sarcastic and sarcastic. Too bad. The man smiled wryly. "In that case, I would have had to get your address." Jennifer held back the urge to reply and handed Michael a business card. He took it and whistled. "Juvenile Inspector, Senior Lieutenant Jones Jennifer." "Not bad. I never thought you'd be on the police force. I was a specialist in another field, and they only took me here to educate kids. I never thought I'd be doing that. I didn't see myself as a school teacher either." The man laughed and punched the number into his phone. Jennifer opened her eyes wide and gasped. "What? No way? You were dumb as a cork. How could you be? Michael rolled his eyes and shook his head. It's been 13 years and you're still as cocky and self-important as ever. Who's to say? Okay, well, if you hear anything, give me a call. Jennifer said hurriedly and left. She didn't say goodbye or anything. The thoughts and feelings of her childhood came flooding back. Yes, someone will probably say that it is strange. They are almost 30 years old. What childhood resentments? But for Jennifer, immersed in her own problems, after the death of her mother and the disappearance of her father, it was the last straw. A spitting aunt, a strange man in the apartment, and him, the man who occupied the girl's room and made her worry almost every day. Because of him, she almost lost her gold medal and had a fight with her aunt, so much so that she threatened to get rid of her niece. It wasn't just a childish grudge, it was something you can't forget. Baby, stay with Aunt Nancy. She'll look after you. Jennifer whispered softly in her daughter's ear. But where are you going so late? Jennifer sighed. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth while it was still early. To work. I got called into work. Molly nodded and hugged her mother. Nancy, I'll pick her up in the morning then so I don't wake you up if anything happens, okay? The tall, thin woman, Jennifer's neighbor, nodded. It wasn't the first time she had stayed with a girl whose mother worked all the time. Raising a child alone, there are a lot of downsides. Jennifer left Nancy's apartment and went about her business. She got into the old car that once belonged to her husband and drove off. At 12:30 at night, the phone rang. On the other side was the slightly agitated voice of a man asking for an urgent call to the abandoned school building. It was Michael. Oh gods! How Jennifer was angry. She just didn't understand what he wanted from her at almost midnight, but he was asking to come urgently, so she sent her daughter to a neighbor's house and went to the school building herself. She'd have to remember where it was. Night roads were a nightmare for the woman. She hated going anywhere in the dark. The fear that still lingered constantly plagued her, but the strange, joking messages that came from Michael kept Jennifer going. She just wanted to remember a couple of skills from her self-defense classes and smash his smug nose in for upsetting her daughter and making Jennifer herself drive off halfway through the night, unknowingly to wherever. How angry she was, but there was nothing she could do but clutch the steering wheel with all her might and rid the dumb jokes and the messages from Michael out of the corner of her eye. Jennifer wouldn't be surprised if she arrived at the school building and he was waiting for her with a smile on his face and said he was just bored. The car had to be parked far away from her destination, simply for the reason that the woman didn't know what kind of soil was there. Considering it was spring, there could be both snow and knee-deep water, and that was a best-case scenario. Jennifer climbed out of the car and turned on her flashlight, a good thing she had known to grab one before she left. Trying to remember the way to the abandoned school, she trudged through the mud and snow. Good thing she'd worn shoes that wouldn't get wet. Despite her excellent grades, Jennifer always liked to have fun with her friends. She never lagged behind her girlfriends in relationships, also ran behind the garages, and came home after midnight, drunk. True, it was once or twice, no more. The aunt was to blame. While the other girls sprayed a ton of perfume on themselves and chewed a whole pack of mint gum to cover up the smell of cigarettes and booze, Jennifer had no reason to do that. Jenna didn't care about her. She was immersed in herself and her memoirs. Jennifer wanted to listen to moralizing like the rest of them, wanted to hide the smell and try to get out of the house after midnight, but she couldn't. Jenna herself sometimes asked her why Jennifer didn't drink, invited the Beaumont to her parties, and sometimes suggested her acquaintances as suitors. Because of this, Jennifer would often leave the house or sit with her headphones on. At that time, she and her friends would raid every abandoned house in the neighborhood. Of course, the huge school building didn't go unnoticed. Jennifer's memory did not fail her, and she recognized the exact location of the school. It was a huge, sometimes crumbling building, where once they wanted to make a factory, then a sewing shop, and then they gave up. 10 years ago, the building had been a wreck, and now it seemed to be hanging on by a thread. Jennifer sighed and walked inside. She still couldn't figure out what Michael was doing in this place and why he wanted Jennifer. Once inside, the woman heard the annoying creaking sound the wooden floor made. It was like a sieve, so badly gnawed by mice. There was trash, cigarette butts, and bottles lying everywhere. Jennifer pulled out her cell phone and asked Michael where he was. In response, from somewhere overhead, Michael dedicated the phone. "Tell me why you pulled me out of bed in. Michael? Michael?" Jennifer broke into a run, but the man's warning shout stopped her. Michael was hanging from a hole in the floor on the second floor. Apparently, he had fallen through it. He somehow kept his balance and even managed to hold his phone. "The floor is very flimsy. You climb up, you could fall through it yourself," Michael explained, dedicating himself to the floor. Jennifer nodded. She was well aware of that herself. "Why didn't you call the emergency services? You figured that since you got me in here, you'd be the one to get me out." An exasperated sigh echoed throughout the building. "The guys told me about a local homeless guy who lives at the school. They say he walks around, helps everyone, and they give him food and clothes. Are you sure it's him?" Jennifer asked excitedly, and then hesitated. "Okay, I get it. We'll talk about it later. For now, we need to figure out how to get you out. Maybe the emergency services?" Michael didn't have time to answer. The board beneath him began to make a sickening creaking sound. Sure, the height wasn't very high. He'd probably survived the fall, but it wasn't just the height. The first floor was full of beams, metal objects, and such. He fell on them. No ambulance would help. Jennifer awed and threw herself up the stairs. For a second, she was seized by memories she would rather not remember. Of that very day. She couldn't hear Michael screaming. She could only hear the damn boards that were creaking, crunching, and generally making too many noises that just kept the woman from concentrating. She realized the rescue service wasn't going to make it in time. Remembering the lessons of rescuing drowning people, Jennifer flopped to the floor as soon as she heard a creak beneath her. She prayed to God that she wouldn't fall. An image of a daughter who might be alone came to mind, but then another, darker and gloomier Jennifer crawled harder. Carefully pulling off her belt, Jennifer tossed one end to Michael. He tossed his phone back to the ladder and picked up the end of the belt. Jennifer grabbed some kind of beam with her other hand and began to pull. "Don't fly off after me," Michael warned. "I'm not going to." Jennifer parried and pulled again. Michael began to crawl out of the hole, but it was eerily slow, and the floor beneath them buckled harder and harder. The man was apparently stuck, thanks to the thick jacket that helped him not fall, but it was also preventing him from getting out. Jennifer still managed to pull Michael out of his trap. She was sweating and her arm was aching as the floor beneath the man. He slowly crawled towards the flimsy staircase. Jennifer descended to the first floor and sighed, shaking off her clothes and stretching her jacket. "You're insane," Michael pronounced and leaned against the wall. When one frame last year caught, their pirouettes had to do more pirouettes. The woman grinned. A second after she said that, a beam fell a couple of centimeters from where Michael was, fell to the first floor, and broke in two with a crash, and both Jennifer and Michael stood with their eyes wide open. About time. Michael said and exhaled. It could have been me. The angry look the woman threw at the boy was unmatched. For a second, it seemed that Michael would have chosen to go back. Why did you call me instead of the emergency services? Are you sick of living, you idiot? Are you out of your mind? Shouted Jennifer, approaching the man. You're an idiot and a moron. Are you scared for me? Michael asked incredulously. Jennifer was half silent and leaned against the icy stone wall, tears coming to her eyes. But she held back as she always did. I'm losing everyone, she answered hoarsely, and lately it seems like it's my curse. I've lost my mother, my father, my husband. I buried my mother not in front of my children, as a grown woman, but when I was 13. I didn't understand what had happened or how it was possible. My father had left my life even earlier, starting a series of these events. I was 10. I didn't even have time to memorize what he looked like. If it wasn't for pictures, I wouldn't have known. And I buried my husband, being not a gray-haired old lady and with hands trembling from old age, but with a child in my arms, with a 7-year-old girl who to this day does not understand why Daddy left her. And Daddy, at the last second of his life, called me, not the emergency services, not the ambulance, but me. A single traitorous tear rolled out of Jennifer's eye, but she brushed it away so quickly that Michael didn't notice. He'd been in an accident. The car had flipped over, warped. It was impossible to get out from inside. He realized this, so he called me and apologized for everything. I was at work and I was interviewing a witness. I was angry that he interrupted me. Then I got a voicemail from him and I wanted to open it, but I got a call from the ambulance. He was driving in the dark late at night and he sent a video of him saying goodbye to his daughter. Jennifer covered her face with her hands and breathed heavily. She couldn't understand why she was saying all this, especially since Michael, truth be told, didn't really care who to tell anymore. In the 8 months that Mason had been gone, Jennifer had never, ever told anyone about her pain. That's why I was scared for you, because I won't suffer another death, much less one caused by me. Michael put his hand on Jennifer's shoulder. I'm sorry, I really am. It was stupid, coming here alone, calling you and... Jennifer raised her eyes to the man and shook her head. I'm just glad you're alive. I'm glad everything turned out okay. Wait. Jennifer's discerning gaze noticed movement in the darkness. It was as if someone was standing there listening. The woman snatched the flashlight from Michael's hands and pointed it into the darkness. A short man with a beard and mustache, wearing an old hat, a fleece jacket, and old boots was looking at her. Jennifer recognized him, just as Molly had described him. Dad? About her father, Jennifer didn't remember much. He was short, shorter than Susan, and even shorter than Jenna. Dad had a tattoo on his forearm and a large scar behind his ear. Jennifer didn't know where he was from, but she remembered her father telling more and more stories about his origins. At first she had believed, eventually she realized she was being lied to. Now an old man with gray hair, a sad, frightened look stood in front of Jennifer, and she couldn't understand at all. Was this her father or not? She took a step forward, but Michael grabbed her arm. Father, what are you talking about? Jennifer waved the man away and walked toward the old man with slow and cautious steps. She was afraid of scaring him. Good evening. My name is Jennifer. And you are? The old man smiled, revealing yellow teeth. They call me Gary. Your father's name was John, wasn't it? Michael asked with his usual sneer. Jennifer rolled her eyes and chose not to answer. Don't you recognize me? I realize it's been 19 years, but 19? The old man asked. so I only remember those years. I didn't count, of course, but about 20 years ago, I woke up in another city in the snow. I didn't remember anything." Gary lowered his head and began to speak hoarsely, as if remembering something he disliked very much. Jennifer listened intently, trying to look at the unfamiliar features of his face. "I lived there for a few years, and then I came to this wonderful town by chance. The people here are very kind, not unlike the people in the place where I woke up. They feed me, sing to me, even give me clothes, and it's not a bad place to live. It's chilly in winter, of course, but I've gotten used to it." Shocked at the face and total incomprehension, Jennifer looked at the old man in front of her. She listened to him and she was getting scared. It was as if what he was telling her had happened to her personally. It was so horrible that she took a few slow steps back and leaned against the wall again. Michael touched her shoulder again and nodded, letting her know he was close by. "So you don't remember anything that happened before you woke up in that town?" asked Michael, giving Jennifer time to take a breath. The old man shook his head. "Do you have a tattoo of a ship on your forearm?" Jennifer asked. Gary blurted out a smile as he looked at the girl and rolled up the sleeve of the jacket that was wide to him. "Here it is, right here. Ships, you know, I've always liked them. They're beautiful, you have to admit. It's a pity we don't have a sea to look at this splendor." The air stuck in Jennifer's lungs and wouldn't come out. She looked helplessly at Michael and nodded. The man looked at the old man strangely. There was distrust and suspicion in his gaze. "And the crescent-shaped scar behind his ear?" Gary shrugged. "I haven't had to look in a mirror in 20 years, ma'am." The old man smacked his lips. Michael approached him and asked him to take off his hat. Behind his ear, there was indeed a big, thick scar like a crescent moon. The man turned to Jennifer and nodded. She couldn't hold back a sigh. Her knees shook so hard it felt like the ground was about to go out from under her feet, and her hands couldn't grasp the phone in her pocket. Someone had texted, however. It didn't care at all right now. Jennifer reached in and pulled out her phone, and from under the case she pulled out an old, tattered picture of her father and mother. They were smiling happily together and looking at the camera. Carefully, Jennifer held out the photo to Michael, who showed it to the old man, dedicating it with a flashlight. "Do you recognize it?" Gary, as usual, shrugged his shoulders. "Not the man, but the woman. She's beautiful. I think I've even dreamed about her sometimes." "Yeah, that's her. I couldn't figure out where I'd seen her, but she comes to me often, talking heresy. No wonder. The cold makes you dream." "This is a picture of my parents, Susan and John. 19 years ago, my father went missing. He was short with a tattoo of a ship on his forearm and a scar behind his ear. He made paper ships and gave them away like you gave my daughter's ship." The old man listened to Jennifer in silence, not daring to speak a word against it. On his wrinkled and overgrown face, there was a storm of emotions, from fright to hope. It seemed that he was about to cry. "Do you think I am your father, ma'am?" "Yes," Jennifer answered clearly. "Why didn't you say you were looking for your father?" Michael hissed almost in Jennifer's face. They had talked Gary, or John, into having Michael over to their house for the night and then going to the hospital the next day. Admittedly, it wasn't an option that Michael liked very much, his apartment having been turned into a bed and breakfast. "I wasn't sure." Jennifer shrugged and walked over to the sink to pour water. "I couldn't tell you that maybe my dad was a homeless guy who gave the kids paper boats. I thought I was crazy, and besides, you're not the one to tell. Is it okay to bring him to my house? First of all, you suggested it. Second of all, it's not okay to bring him to my house." Molly would come over in the morning and find a homeless guy smelling like garbage on the couch. Michael nodded. "Okay, Jennifer, I get. I have a former neurologist who works at Central Hospital. I'll call in the morning and see what can be done." "Yeah, well, you call me. I'll try to get there early." There was a loud sigh. Michael rolled his eyes expressively. "Where are you going at 2 o'clock in the morning?" "Stay. I've got a great bed and a folding chair. You don't have the girl alone, do you?" Jennifer nodded her head. She was very tired and did not even try to refuse Michael's offer. In the few hours she had spent in the place, the hatred and bad memories had faded away somewhere. Maybe it was due to fatigue, or maybe Jennifer finally realized that they were no longer children. Despite the tiredness and even detachment, neither Jennifer nor Michael wanted to sleep. The man made the bed and laid out the couch. At first he tried to walk quietly around his own apartment, but then he realized that Gary was very difficult to wake. It wasn't that surprising, though. He slept in an abandoned building next door to alcoholics. They hardly behaved quietly at night. Jennifer made tea for two. The man came in and plopped tiredly on a bar stool. "So what? Why that Dr. the X?" Jennifer smiled and sipped her green tea. It should be made clear that Jennifer liked to get off topic with herself. She hated being the center of attention, the reason being that she was afraid. Being always in her aunt's house, more of an appendix to the apartment than a member of it, Jennifer transferred this behavior to the rest of her life. She had almost no friends. Those couple of colleagues from work and former classmates stayed in the neighboring town, where the woman lived for the last 10 years. She didn't make any acquaintances in the new city, and admittedly, she didn't want to. So, for example, with Nancy, Jennifer met by accident, having mixed up the doors of the apartment. In the house where Molly and Jennifer live, not all apartments have a number, because the house was not built so long ago, and not even all the apartments have not yet sold. Those who have already settled in have put numbers on their doors, but Jennifer and Nancy, who have just moved in, have not had time to do so. Late at night, after socializing with one not very polite teenager who had been drinking, Jennifer was coming home and got the wrong apartment door. She banged on Nancy's door for 20 minutes before she called the police. It took the precinct officer a long time to sort out what had happened. Michael grinned and shook his head. Jennifer noticed that he was doing that a little too often lately. "Do you care about that?" Jennifer shrugged and took another sip of her tea. It was hot and flowed pleasantly through her body. Only now it was clear how tired, cold, and scared she was. It was a bad match. Jennifer laughed. "Who better than me to know that it's almost impossible to get along with you?" Michael smiled. "But that phrase is almost always an excuse. So what happened? Did you cheat on her?" "No, of course not." The man brushed it off. "It's just that she wanted children. All her life she dreamed of a lavish wedding and a family, and I was 22. I'd just gotten back from the army and admittedly wasn't going to have kids for the next couple of years. Of course, we tried to live together, to stop fighting, but in the end she left." Michael smiled sadly and sipped his tea. No sugar. Remember, it felt good. "It's hard to forget. I used to run into the kitchen and make you tea 5 times a day because you were lazy. Maybe I liked you taking care of me. No, you just liked messing with me." Jennifer grinned, leaning back against the wall. While Michael was gone, she had time to look around the apartment a little and was generally surprised. Despite the outside clutter, it was clean. The one-bedroom apartment resembled the one Jennifer had lived in with Jenna. A large room, a living room, and a small bedroom. The kitchen was surprisingly done up in very nice modern colors, with a tall table and a few bar stools. It wasn't hard to tell that the man lived here alone, though. There was one pan on the stove, one plate and fork in the sink, and one cup on the countertop. Jennifer had to work hard to find the other cup. So what's your ex-girlfriend's name? I figured you just don't want to talk about your dad, right? Okay, I'll play along. Her name was Mary, and it is. She's a lovely girl, a great neurologist, and probably a good wife, and she's also a mother. She had a son a few years ago, and surprisingly, I became his godfather. No way! I always thought it was hard to keep good relationships with exes. How would I know, though? My husband was my only partner, and he died. How tragic and pathetic. He died and I stayed. It's weird to start a new one. Do you have someone in mind? Isn't there a young English teacher in the school? Michael grimaced. Wendy? She's still working. Jennifer stepped forward and opened her eyes in surprise. No way. She's 90? 82 turned 82 at the beginning of the year. Gods, she's still telling stories about what it was like in England in '56. Jennifer couldn't stop laughing. It seemed like someone had jammed the on button. I can't understand how you got to school. Laughing back, Jennifer said, I could never associate you with a teacher. Other than a felon, did you ever associate me with anyone at all? With a smile at the corner of his lips, Michael asked. The silence was more eloquent than any phrase. Jennifer had never really seen Michael as a good person, never thought he would become anything more than a class bully. There was a time when there was no work at all. His father had finally drank himself into oblivion, started to lose his mind. Yes, Michael was shifting a mug of tea from hand to hand. There was nothing to live on, and my neighbor worked at the school as a vice principal. She retroactively enrolled me in some pedagogical courses, and in September, she got me a job as a teacher. Hodabik had just retired. They called Hodabich an old history teacher who wore a long beard and was bald. Surprisingly, I liked it. The salary, of course, is not great, but you can live. I graduated as a history teacher, and now I have 2 jobs and classroom management. Jennifer and Michael talked a little more about other things, about work, family, and the past, though they mentioned the past only in passing, trying not to talk about how they felt about each other. Jennifer, for the first time in years, closed the gestalt of resentment over what she thought was a spoiled childhood. Thank you, the woman said as she and Michael went to bed. The man gave her a perplexed look for keeping the conversation going and keeping me out of it. He didn't let me think about what was going on with me and my father. You're welcome. Michael replied simply and succinctly. I've always done that. I'm not used to it. What are you talking about? Jennifer asked, confused. When we lived at Aunt Jenna's house, it happened a lot. She'd say something to you, and you'd get caught up in the words, the thoughts. It was obvious you couldn't handle the flow of thoughts and nonsense in your head. Is that why you were talking nonsense? Were you just trying to distract me from thinking? Michael shrugged. Sometimes I just like to piss you off, he said, and went into the bedroom, where he went to sleep in a small and hardly comfortable chair, leaving Jennifer alone with her thoughts. She couldn't believe it. She was really stuck on what she had been told. Jennifer spent long periods of time thinking about problems and solutions, and was aware of the problem, but she could never think that Michael noticed it. However, they had lived in the same room for several years. It would be strange not to notice it. We'll have to do a lot of tests, of course, MRIs, blood tests, and so on. Plus, it's important to get him at least out of the state he's in right now. Nervously, Mary turned around to the door of room number 8, where Gary was lying. Since he doesn't have any identification, my hands are tied. If the story Michael told me is true, You should start recovering your papers immediately so we can begin treatment. Mary was a petite blonde with square glasses, a round face, and dimpled cheeks. She smiled at everyone and was polite, also very excited about Michael's arrival. She seemed to really care for him. Only Jennifer couldn't tell in what way she cared for him. "Thank you, Mary. But if he hasn't had memories for 20 years, can they come back?" Mary put her head down into the clipboard. 20 years is a long time, very long. Usually patients recover quickly with care, but your father has signs of frostbite, signs of beatings. He also drank and probably smoked, and he ate leftovers, which obviously didn't improve the situation. Also, for memories to come back, you need familiar surroundings, familiar people, and he was living in an abandoned school, and hardly anyone was trying to help him. I can't say for sure, but the chances are slim to none. We'll do what we can, but I can't promise anything, especially not until he has an ID. Jennifer covered her face with her hand and shook her head. She didn't know what to do or how to be. The situation was getting worse and worse by the second. "Thank you, Mary." Michael smiled and walked away with Mary. When he returned, Jennifer looked sadly at the room where her father was lying. The orderlies had shaved him and cleaned him up. Jennifer had brought new clothes. Now the woman was sure that this old man, her father, was short with blue eyes, a scar, and a tattoo. She had found him, except he didn't remember anything, and it was awful. "Jennifer, I've been thinking about the files. We can't recover them yet," Jennifer said with a heavy heart. Her words were soaked with grief and heaviness. Dad had a business, an apartment, money, and he'd disappeared too suddenly, and he was in a foreign city. Mom had said he was away on a business trip when he disappeared. He flew away, but he couldn't come back, and I think there's a reason for that. He's clearly been helped to forget his life. If we recover the documents and his status, those involved will probably be very unhappy. Michael nodded tiredly and leaned against the cold wall, adjusting the white robe draped over his shoulders. "It's been 20 years. Do you really think anyone still cares? I've been a police officer for 7 years, and I've seen so much brutality. People are sometimes willing to remember things that happened decades ago, and if it involves money, they never forget." "Yeah, I get it. Then you and I need to find out who's responsible for what happened as soon as possible. Otherwise, we won't be able to cure your father. Thank you for helping me and not going against my better judgment." "You're welcome." Michael chuckled. "I've never been against you." Immediately, memories of 12 years ago came to his mind. "What made you think you could yell at her? What makes you think she's to blame for your troubles?" shouted Michael in the face of Jenna, who stood nonchalantly with a glass of wine in the kitchen and slowly chewed expensive cheese. "She's already lived here longer than I thought she would, so she can't live on my money. It's hard work. She doesn't realize that." "Really? And what kind of labor do you do?" Michael asked snidely, squinting his eyes. "Do you type a sentence a day? Or maybe you sleep with another man? Why are you looking at me like that? I know about your lovers and that you're cheating on my father. So go and tell him," whispered Jenna. "You can't. Maybe because your daddy is an alcoholic and he's about to be fired from his job. Oh, and you won't even have a place to live. So don't cross me, puppy, you hear me?" Jenna smiled and waved her hand, and a large purple mug with some writing on it tumbled to the floor. "No," shouted Michael. "Oh, Michael, how could you break Jennifer's favorite mug?" the woman asked in a deliberately loud voice. Jennifer flew into the kitchen and saw the purple shards with the guy standing next to it. Michael sighed and gave Jenna a long look. These were his last days in this apartment, because soon this woman would kick him and his father out. He realized that, But even more, he realized that he couldn't change his mind, otherwise he would be on the street. Michael was sitting at home when Jennifer called and asked him to come over. He was on sick leave, and when he heard about Jennifer's problems, he realized that he would have to take a mini vacation. Mary was happy to help open the sick leave. To summarize Michael, he is a very kind person. Yes, in high school and even in college, he never shone with excessive discipline and obedience. And what a sin to say, in the army too, more than once he was caught in the boorishness of his superiors. However, with time, it passed, and he began to take everything easier. He never refused to help anyone, but at the same time he was not particularly appreciated in the teaching staff. He often ridiculed other teachers, taking the side of the students, realizing perfectly well that he had once been the same. Of course, no one could fire him. He did not violate any rules, but good relations could not be built. The once popular boy has turned into a man who rarely leaves the house. Most of his friends left for other cities, and those who remained have families. Michael rarely went on vacation, devoting most of his time to work. Jennifer became a ray of light in his boring and ordinary life. He even enjoyed going to abandoned houses and trying to find Jennifer's father. Michael got in his car and drove to the address. He didn't know what Jennifer had in mind there, but he didn't care. Talking to her gave him pleasure. He was no longer thinking about how to make it through the weekend. His head was filled with other thoughts. The door to the apartment was open. "Michael, you?" "Come in," shouted a female voice from the far room. The man made his way there and saw a large desk piled with folders, next to which stood a laptop covered in pictures. "What kind of archive summary is this?" Michael grinned and threw his backpack on the couch. "I asked a friend from the police to send me all the documents from my father's missing persons case." "How did he get them so fast?" "Wait, you drove to another city overnight to get them? Jennifer, have you lost your mind? What about the daughter?" "She was with Nancy." Jennifer waved it off and walked over to the stack of files. "Let's see everything. You're crazy, don't you think?" Michael asked, approaching the table. "I need to find the culprit, or my father won't be able to go back to normal." "Yeah. Let's just hurry up, shall we? You can take care of the laptop. There's a file with all of Dad's biography, his phone calls, possessions, and everything. An acquaintance did it." "An acquaintance? I'm getting scared. We worked with him before he moved away." "He's got access to the database, so he's been a big help." "Come on, the sooner we start, the sooner we're done. By the way, Molly's gonna be here soon. I gotta figure out what to tell her." A few hours later, the front door slammed and Molly came running into the room. She was happy and cheerful, obviously wanting to tell her mother something. But when she saw the strange man, she was embarrassed. "Hello," she said quietly. Michael smiled and waved. Jennifer took her daughter to the kitchen. She was not there for a long time, so the man decided not to waste time. He continued to leaf through the files. His gaze stopped on the largest file marked by the author of the list. The man opened it and began to read slowly and thoughtfully. With each line, he was surprised more and more. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Jennifer came back in and quietly closed the door. She was really tired. She had already gone to bed. Good thing tomorrow was a day off. No homework to do. Where was she up late? At a friend's. Did you find something? What do you know about your father's business? Jennifer shrugged. I was 10. I wasn't really interested in it then. And when I was, there was no one to ask. Did you know why you and your mother didn't get the business? Yeah, they weren't married, so my mom's last name is Clark, and we didn't get my grandmother's 4-bedroom apartment. Not for that reason, there's another. Listen carefully. When opening your father's firm, there was a condition that the shares cannot be inherited in the family line. That is, when one of the partners dies or his withdrawal from the company, all shares go to the remaining partners of the firm. Is this legal? Yes, but it's rare. I suspect your father didn't think much of family when he started the firm. He and Mom got together later. But that's not all. Do you know how many partners there were? Jennifer shook her head and climbed onto the couch with her feet up. 4. Your father, Wilson, Parker, and Smith. Do you know how many are left now? 1 Parker, you think? Wait. 3 years before your dad went missing, Wilson died, heart attack at 41. That early? That's weird and more than that. The thing is, in the will he left, your father inherited the stock. But it's possible, under the bylaws, he had no right to transfer the stock to outsiders, but he transferred it to a partner. And your father got a controlling interest and the ability to run the firm pretty much on his own. But why would Wilson do that? The boat my father made for Molly had a sign on it that's on my boat. Wilson James. I don't remember much about my father, but I do know that my father fell in love with the sea when he met a friend of his, and everything in the house connected to the sea was connected to that friend. I couldn't remember his name, but I think it was Wilson. So he left a will to his father. Perhaps he knew or felt something. But that's not all. 5 years after your father went missing, Smith died of an accident. 5 years, that's the time after which a person is declared dead. Jennifer said thoughtfully, and so passes by law the firm, the remaining partners. And Parker, to get the full package, gets rid of the second partner and remains the sole owner of the firm. The woman whispered, "So you think my father was eliminated to get the inheritance?" "Yes, I suspect that Parker and Smith conspired to get the 50% of the firm that your father had. How did this go unnoticed? Didn't it become suspicious to anyone?" Jennifer asked incomprehensively to herself, rather than to Michael. Money decides everything. You know who lives and who doesn't. The only thing that confuses me is the fact that your father is alive. Wilson and Smith are dead, and your father isn't. And that's easy. I think those who wanted to get rid of my father just hit him and threw him in some quarry. I don't know, but he survived, and luckily he lost his memory. It's scary to realize that. Michael confessed and prostrated himself. "Do you have any coffee?" Jennifer nodded and got up from the couch, her eyes a little hazy. She wasn't looking around. Her eyes were focused on one point. "Are you okay?" Michael asked gently. "So is there coffee?" A few minutes later, she was already standing with a coffee pot and brewing coffee. "Aren't you busy tomorrow?" "Why don't you sit with Molly?" "I'm going to go into town and visit Parker. I want to ask him something." Michael, who had been sitting at the table before, jumped up and in 2 steps was next to Jennifer. "Are you out of your mind? We assumed a minute ago that he was responsible for 2 people being dead and 120 years without memory, and you decide to go straight to him and claim you know he's a criminal." "Don't yell," Jennifer said tiredly and lowered her gaze to Michael's hands that held her by the shoulders. She could feel his warmth and his strong grip. "Let me go, or the coffee will be on the floor in a few seconds." Slowly lowering her gaze to her hands, Michael shuffled all the way back. He did it unknowingly. "Are you worried?" Jennifer asked, not demanding an answer. "I've worked with personalities like that, so you don't have to worry about my safety." "I'll go with you," the man said firmly. His confident gaze looked directly at Jennifer. "No arguments. Yeah, I get it. Why are you bothering with me and my problems?" Jennifer asked as they sat down at the table and began to drink coffee. Michael was taken aback and looked at the woman uncomprehendingly. "Well, when I met you, the negative emotions that I experienced as a child flared up in my soul. It's childish, I know. Well, haven't you ever had that?" A quiet chuckle escaped Michael's lips, and he shook his head. "No. Maybe it's because I've never felt negative about you." Jennifer gasped. "What do you mean? You were always building a sneak attack." "Yeah, you said you talked nonsense when you didn't want me to dwell on my thoughts, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, you broke the mug my friends gave me, you broke my headphones, you made fun of me at school, and even blew off boys I dated. You were ruining my life." Jennifer spoke slowly, trying to control the emotions that had suddenly flared up. "Remember the new headphones for my birthday?" "Yes, that was the only gift from Aunt Jenna in all the years." "Why are you looking at me like that?" "No. Wasn't that a gift from her?" Michael grinned. He squinted at the woman, trying to figure out how someone so smart and savvy could be so stupid at times. "The guys and I worked part-time during the summer, and I used the money to buy them. I didn't have enough to buy them, though. I had to borrow some from my father. It was his stash in case of a hangover. He gave me a hell of a beating." Jennifer looked at the man confused. She gently took his hand and tilted her head. "Why?" "You needed them so you wouldn't listen to me. I saw how worried you were about them. I thought you hated me, and you did. I liked you, Jennifer, and I was a silly boy who expressed sympathy through. You understand. Trite, huh?" Jennifer stared incomprehensively in front of her. In an instant her world had been turned upside down. She could sense that something was wrong, but could never quite figure out what. Coping with her emotions, the woman jumped up from the table and announced, "It's decided. We're going into town tomorrow. Jennifer, darling, is that you?" "Were you about 13 when I last saw you?" asked Kevin Parker, an older man in an expensive suit. He jumped up from his chair as soon as he realized who had come to see him. Michael and Jennifer eyed the man warily, not understanding why he was so welcoming to them. He took them to the local cafeteria and ordered a few not-so-cheap meals himself. "Don't worry, I'm paying. After all, this firm was built by your father's labor and sweat, so it's a shame you couldn't find him. It was you who paid for 8 years to find him." Asked Michael, and Jennifer looked at him shocked. "Yes, I had hoped to find something, but he just disappeared into thin air. All your partners have disappeared strangely, don't you think?" "Uh-oh. I recognize my father's grip." Kevin grinned and smiled sadly. "Yes, it was. I honestly could never believe it was an accident. First James, then John, then Jack. One after another. For 6 years, I only took the garbage out with the guards. I was afraid I'd get the same fate. Weren't you the one who set up that account?" Jennifer asked snidely. "No, I had no reason to. At least Jack's death. After your father went missing, I got the controlling interest, not Jack. Well, I mean, he split it between us, but I got 51%. But what's 100 better? Young man, you've probably never run a big firm on your own. Believe me, it's not that easy. I was going to give some of my shares to Jack to do the main management, and Jack knew about it, along with some lawyers who were drawing up the contract. And then Jack died by accident, and there was definitely an accident here. 2 other workers died on that construction site. There was a safety violation. The site was just shut down. It's all in Jack's file, so I had nothing to do with it." Kevin smiled sadly and sipped water from his glass. "Besides, I had nothing to do with John's disappearance. I had no idea what time he was going home. only Jack knew his flight time. Jennifer looked at Michael with confusion. If Kevin was to be believed, their version was crumbling before their eyes. And Jack Smith, how had he behaved in the years since John had disappeared? Michael asked gently. He was always calling someone and nervous. I was sure he'd just gotten himself a woman. You could hear in his voice that he was calling a woman, and that was just normal for him. He was always very jumpy and restless. They say that's why he died. You have to stay calm on a construction site. Jennifer and Michael asked Kevin a couple more questions and left. Already in the car, they looked at each other confused. You don't think it's him? Not only did he spend 8 years paying for the search, but he also erected a huge monument to your father. I read in the files he was actually going to give 10% of the shares to Smith, which would have made him the leader. I don't think he just changed his mind and decided to take him out. And he couldn't have been involved in Wilson's death because he was in Israel for over 6 months for treatment, said Michael and looked up from his laptop. How do you know all this? I wrote to the very person you know on your behalf, and he sent me the information on Parker and Smith. Jennifer snatched the laptop out of Michael's hands and took a deep breath. Who gave you permission? You didn't think I'd let you go talk to an alleged criminal, did you? Jennifer turned away from Michael, muttering something quietly under her breath. But Michael could see the edge of a smile on the woman's face. I can't get over the fact that Smith was calling someone all the time. Who was it? 20 years ago, not everyone had a cell phone, and most people called from landlines, which means that somewhere could have saved the number of that lady. Unless, of course, there's still some of Smith's stuff somewhere. Michael concluded. Jennifer grinned and started the car. I read something too. I can't believe you got into the house. Michael hissed and sneezed. Jennifer drove them to the house where Smith once lived. Because he had no one, the house was left vacant and was just another abandoned building. Nobody actually lives here, so I don't see anything wrong with that. You ripped the boards off the windows with a tire iron and climbed in. Michael objected. Oh, it's nothing. We'll write it off to the teenagers. She shrugged her shoulders and walked on, shining a flashlight on her way. Here, shouted Michael. Jennifer walked over and saw the phone with the phone book next to it. How will we know which number we need? The woman shrugged and opened the dusty old book. Michael and Jennifer sneezed at the dust rising. So many years had passed after all. The book flipped through very quickly. Pages skipped until Jennifer saw a number written in red pen. Judging by the spread of the book, it was the page that had been opened the most, and the number had been circled several times in pencil. It wasn't signed, Michael noticed. It doesn't need to be, Jennifer said sadly. I know it by heart. They walked outside in a terrible mood, not knowing how to react to the news. Michael looked directly into Jennifer's eyes. He moved closer to her and kissed her. Jennifer was taken aback. What are you doing? You just broke into the house, found the culprit, well, almost, and probably helped your dad. You're awesome, you know that? You're not what I thought you were either. Jennifer confessed and blushed. Is this the first time in your life you've ever admitted you were wrong? Michael grinned, and Jennifer punched him painfully in the shoulder. You can't make me change my mind. Jennifer smiled imperceptibly. Jenna, is that you? A tall man in black clothing asked, holding out his ID card in front of him. Did you know Smith Jack? Asked the investigator to Jenna when she was at the police station. No. The woman replied hysterically. Your phone number was found in his address book, and there are witnesses who saw you together. So what? He was my lover. Jenna stuck her head up high. Yes, and also the mastermind behind the attack on your brother. He was the only one who knew when he was going home. John was attacked near the train station. An attack? Screamed Jenna. Are you out of your mind? Why would I hurt my own brother? Your mother's 4-bedroom apartment. Clear and concise, the investigator replied. You were up to your neck in debt that year. You had a loan. Yes, and I suspect not only to banks were owed, and immediately after receiving the inheritance in 6 months, you put the apartment for sale, and it was very quickly bought, which suggests that the buyer was found early. You paid off the debt, got rid of your brother, whose not small bank account went to you and his daughter, but since she was small, her mother put her money aside. And after Susan died, you got the leftovers. That's where you got the money for the Beaumont parties, Jenna, isn't it? The investigator asked snidely. Your niece has provided all the evidence that will help me put you away for a long time, as well as solve a 20-year-old case. So you can look for a lawyer, Jenna. You will definitely need one. The investigator was an old friend of Jennifer's. She had heard the entire conversation, thanks to the recorded phone. They listened to the tapes along with Michael, the man holding Jennifer's hand. You win. He smiled. We did. Corrected Jennifer and squeezed Michael's hand harder. 3 years later, in front of the 3-story house, a large truck with a transportation sign stopped. 2 uniformed men got out of the truck and walked toward the house. They had keys. An older Mazda parked next to the truck, from which a blonde-haired man with a large bag on his shoulder got out. He looked around the area and opened the back door. A tall girl, about 11 years old, stepped out. She was smiling cheerfully and looking around, hoping to spot something interesting. She was holding a large paper boat. A short, bald old man with a beard got out of the passenger seat. He shouted something to the porters. Where's Jennifer? John asked Michael in a husky voice. Was she supposed to get here before us? Michael shrugged and pulled out his cell phone to dial Jennifer's number. She's probably hanging out with the criminals again. Such nice weather, she's working again. The old man complained. Nature was in full bloom. May was in full bloom. The smell of lilacs everywhere. The sun was shining so brightly that it seemed as if summer had already arrived. The trees were covered with little leaves, birds were singing on all sides, and the pond behind the house glistened in the sun. It really was grace, not weather, but Jennifer was at work again. She had been spending too much time there lately. That was Michael's opinion. Uncle Michael, look. Molly shouted and pointed to the road, where a police car with flashing lights was coming almost at full speed. About 100 meters from the 3-story house, she turned off her lights and began to slow down. The police Ford stopped in front of Michael. Jennifer jumped out of the back seat and waved to the driver and his partner. Thanks, guys, I'll owe you one. Good luck. Jennifer turned back to her family and was met with shocked looks. Why, you actually took my car, so I had to improvise. Where have you been? Michael asked. Were you going to miss the housewarming party? Jennifer rolled her eyes and walked toward the house. She was in a great mood, and even the nagging of her favorite person wouldn't ruin this beautiful day. For the first time in years, she felt at home. In an unfinished building, where they had just brought the sealed furniture, but this place was truly her own. Her whole family would gather under one roof, and for the first time in a long time, the woman felt happy. By the way, were you supposed to be at work too? Jennifer remarked snidely, showing the movers where to carry the big couch. It was your class that put on the Metallica concert near the principal's house. You got a call, but you didn't answer. I don't take work numbers on weekends. Michael muttered and wondered what kind of reprimand he'd get on Monday when he got back to his favorite class. The head teacher had told him not to take those slackers, but how could he refuse them? It was almost impossible. Oh, he'd probably lose his bonus. Although, it would seem, what's he got to do with it? End of the year guys are out for their last free year. Why touch them? Snapping her fingers in front of Michael's eyes, Jennifer chuckled and walked into the house. These blackouts often happened when the man was thinking about something. It had been especially so in the last year. If someone had told Jennifer 15 years ago about what Michael would be thinking, she would have twisted her finger at her temple. Molly ran into the house first and immediately rushed to the second floor, where she chose the largest and most beautiful room. True, there was nothing special about it yet, but Grandpa already had a plan to please his granddaughter. John had not recovered all of his memory, but he had definitely gotten some of it back. He couldn't testify at the trial against his sister because the doctors wouldn't give him permission. However, the prosecutor still referred to his memories. However, and without his help, Jenna was sentenced to 11 years in a general security colony, and all the money and the apartment returned to the owner. It is worth recognizing that Mary turned out to be a good doctor. The first successes in the treatment of John appeared after a couple of months, and 6 months later he already remembered his daughter. A year later, he remembered almost all the events of the last 30 years of his life. However, it was very difficult to fully recover his memory. Jennifer has never been able to get from her father's memories of how he met her mother. Yes, and much that was before the birth of his daughter, he did not remember. However, that didn't make him any less loved. Molly almost immediately got used to her grandfather, spent a lot of time with him, and often asked for help. John taught his granddaughter how to make ships out of paper and was very happy to have a family again. He recalled with a sad smile the years he spent on the streets. Michael also became friends with his father-in-law, although it must be admitted that for a long time he could not get used to him. His grouchiness and slight arrogance kept John from trusting his son-in-law. Jennifer was walking up the stairs to the top of the stairs. She took Michael under her arm and pulled him to the 3rd floor. There was the largest room with a huge window and a small terrace. Jennifer and Michael had chosen this place for themselves together. The woman wanted to arrange on the terrace a corner of rest with flowers, and Michael dreamed of sitting there and reading books. However, their desires did not contradict each other. As soon as the hatch leading to the stairs slammed shut, Jennifer spun in place and started laughing loudly. Michael looked at her with a half smile. "Have you decided to go crazy?" "I guess you just know. I feel like this is the first white streak in my life, like there were none before, a lifetime-long black streak." Michael slowly walked over to Jennifer and hugged her. "May the white streak be as long as the black streak." Jennifer reached into her bag with her hand and pulled out a time-yellowed, framed ship from there. It was here, in this room, that the symbol of their happy life would hang.
Subscribe and click the bell.
The Corver family was not starstruck, but they were not poor either. It was an average intellectual family. The head of the family, Nick Corver, worked as a math teacher at school. His wife, Sophia, worked in the village administration. Corver had a daughter, Helen. They would have been happy to give the girl a brother or sister, but the state of health did not allow Sophia to become a mother. The second time they lived amicably. In the summer, they went to the mountains, to the lake, or campgrounds as a family. And in the cold time, Corver loved to arrange family gatherings together, cooked hot pastries, or own or captive bags under fragrant aromatic tea. All remarks to each other, if any, sounded not at all offensive and were taken rather as jokes. Unlike many teenagers, Helen Corver had only heard firsthand what strained family relationships and parental misunderstandings were like. Whatever happened to her, Helen could always trust her parents and count on their help. In the family reigned love, understanding, and mutual respect. If there was something that marred the happiness of the family, It was the relationship between Nick and his mother-in-law. The situation is anecdotal, except he wouldn't be laughing. Dear Wendy apparently considered it her duty almost every day to visit them and give valuable instructions, or rather to poke her nose into everything in her field of vision. Why is your porch wobbling? Looking disapprovingly in the direction of her son-in-law, Wendy said, What are you in the house for, man? It's like this every time. That the beds are not to dig, that the grass is low, that here to catch a cold. A separate topic was the closet of my wife and daughter. A real man should dress up his women. My mother-in-law insisted. When Sophia saw a beautiful dress on TV and said she wanted the same Nick. Well, right, honestly, what do you have them wearing? Helen looked at her tracksuit and shrugged her shoulders. It didn't escape Grandma's eyes. You're going someplace decent, or else there's nothing to do. Solemnly, Wendy summed it up. Mom, what do you mean by a decent place? Sophia grinned. A theater or a restaurant? We don't go to them. You should. Oh, and what though? Not in a tracksuit. Sophia is tempted to reply that she and her late father were not regulars at such places either, but she changes her mind. After all, Mom is Mom, and she wants her daughter to have everything she needs for a happy life. And thank God that Nick preferred to keep his mouth shut, for he didn't like conflict. Nick Corver really did not like conflicts, but adored his girls. For their sake, Corver was ready to endure anyone, including squabbling and restless mother-in-law and soft character of Nick Konstantinovich. His relatives noticed it, shook their heads, and expressed their discontent. Yes, she's just riding you, said Betty, Nick's sister. Mark my word, it won't end well, and she was right. It all started with Sophia's promotion. Years ago, Sophia, a college graduate, joined the local government. Simply put, she got a job as a secretary. Then she was lucky. The previous secretary was just going on maternity leave. After the position of secretary was removed from the staff schedule, Sophia was not left without a job. She became a specialist and finally reached the position of vice chairman. Her duties have increased, but also the salary became higher. And that's what prompted a new round of attacks. Wendy on Nick, on the occasion of his wife's promotion. And to you, they slaughtered a boar. The women prepared dinner, and after a shower, Corver and their relatives gathered at a generously set table. Alas, at first hearty sit-downs with the easy hand of Wendy turned into a real balaganza. During the family feast, the elderly woman drank too much and she, as they call it, was carried away. Shame on you, she said. A woman and like a damned and earns, by the way, more than you. Mom warned me before Sophia started that, Mom, I'm telling the truth. Can't we deal with this truth on our own? They'll figure it out. Nick, do you really like your job? I like it, my son-in-law answered briefly. But I like it even more when my wife earns good money. The truth, Wendy continued to stir things up. God, exclaimed Helen and grabbed not a single piece of meat pie and a glass of tea, went to her room. But what's rather reproachful? Sophia asked her mother. By the way, Scarlett has a scarlet transitional age, and the girl very painfully perceives your. She could not find the right words and only waved her hand. If there were another person in Wendy's place, he would have realized that he had just spoiled a peaceful family holiday and hurried to smooth over the conflict. But where was it? Strong alcohol plus a quarrelsome temper. A mixture of thermonuclear girl and scandalized. And let the girl know that her daddy is a worthless man. And what makes him worthless, I wonder. Betty obeyed, who didn't mind what she said. She organically did not like her brother's mother-in-law. And the relatives suspected that the fighting woman was just waiting to have a heart-to-heart fight with Wendy. Those present froze in anticipation of not a weak performance, and were not at all deceived in their expectations. The women screamed so loud that the dishes rang. Your brother is a shit and a lowlife, Wendy said. Yes, my brother is a good man, contended Betty belligerently. But you're an old schemer for your own life? No, you're a meddler in other people's. What did you say? Sophia formidably asked the relative, looming over the sister of her hated brother-in-law. But the young woman from the preamble aside and nonchalantly replied that they had heard. live themselves to live amicably, bring up a daughter, and persuaded Betty. But no. Even on a holiday, there's no peace from you. Mom, but really my son Alexander intervened. You were sitting so well, weren't you? Eggs. Chicken is very thoughtful, threatened Mother, and then came to the table, defiantly poured herself a full shot glass of vodka and drank. Didn't blush. Come on. Zatsatsatsia for this is not to give. She continued savoring the crunch of the pickle. Everyone, as one, just sighed heavily. If Wendy Medvedeva had been on her own for a long time. Why does Grandma always cling to Daddy for the umpteenth time? Helen wondered. She, of course, was still quite young, and due to the lack of life experience, still understood little. But she knew one thing about a husband like Nick. They are still to be found. He doesn't drink, helps his mother with the household chores, earns money. What else do you need? The girls sighed heavily. Voices, related from the hall, could not. Actually, it was mostly Wendy's grandmother who spoke. The others did not dare to try to contradict her, but it seems, unsuccessfully. All in all, fun, and so it was every holiday. The pork pie was getting cold and didn't look so appetizing, and I didn't feel like eating. And why do we have everything not like people? Helen thought, we're getting there. And the tea, which also began to cool down. This year, Corver's only daughter was finishing school. She had dreamed of becoming a journalist since 5th grade and was eagerly counting the days until graduation. And then Helen would go to university to study and work as a journalist. The girl imagined interviewing a celebrity. Her heart closed sweetly. God, but why do universities have to study for 5 whole years with a sigh? Helen thought, that's such a long time. She desperately wanted to go to another world where everything is beautiful, cultured, and there are no table scandals. To hell with all of you. Helen heard her grandmother's loud voice and shuddered. Don't listen to me, but in vain. After a while, the voices fell silent. A fuss was heard, and the girl realized with relief that the guests were leaving. When the house was quiet, Helen came out of her room. Her father was sitting in an armchair, obviously thinking hard about something. Don't be mad at Mom, Sophia said, picking up the plates from the table. I'm not. Nick shrugged and sighed, adding, I'm used to it. He looked so lost that Helen wanted to hug her father and say something nice to him, and what, in fact, prevented it. The girl came to Nick and, sitting on the windowsill of the chair, hugged him by the neck. Daddy, I love you very much. With tenderness, said Helen, and added, and you, Mom. I have the coolest parents in the world. Well, we are glad to hear that, Sophia smiled. But to make my joy complete, help me clear the table serving comrade-in-chief, replied the daughter, jokingly saluted. At that moment, all 3 of them were thinking about what a good family they had. But none of them suspected what changes awaited her. Sophia started her new position. Nick continued to sow the reasonable, good, eternal, and indoctrinate young minds with theorems and logarithms. And Helen dreamed of a career as a journalist. It seemed like it would be like that for many years to come. But life arranged otherwise. After a staff meeting in the district administration, Sophia went to a cafe for a snack. She made an order, and having taken a table in a secluded corner of the hall with an appetite, began to eat at You Are Not Busy? With a polite smile, asked a solid man about 50 years old, dressed in a dark gray suit with thin stripes. Sophia shook her head. And you are the new deputy head of the administration of the village, aren't you? The man asked. That's right. Why is it nice to see another spectacular woman in such a responsible position? I forgot what's your name. Sorry, it's just a lot of names, surnames, and patronymics to memorize. Sophia Corver. She introduced herself. Oh, nice to meet you. The man stretched out. Well, I'm the head of Citizen Services. Thomas Parker. You've heard of him. Sophia nodded with a faint smile. Well, that's great. That day, the colleagues chatted and separated. When an administration employee came in, she knew Parker, of course. When Sophia was a specialist, she traveled to the administration office once a month with a report and sometimes ran into him in the hallway. Parker couldn't help but know Sophia by sight. After all, in so many years of work, everyone had managed to be attracted to each other. However, it had only now come to a personal acquaintance. Sophia had heard from colleagues that Parker was a womanizer. It was common for him to fix a young secretary, which, by the way, periodically changed. At one time, there were rumors that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband. It was rumored that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband, who had somehow found out that the young wife was having an affair with the head of the Department for Work with Citizens. It seems that Thomas was married twice, and from each wife he had a child. By the way, his first wife, Emily, had a great career in the same system and made it to the regional administration. Sophia had already forgotten about that lunch at the staff meeting, because she had so much work to do that she had no time to remember. And what was there to remember? It was just an ordinary business lunch, of which there would be many more. "Hello, is Sophia Corver there?" She heard a vaguely familiar voice. "I'm listening," she answered. "Oh, Sophia here. This is Thomas Parker. Remember him?" "Yes, of course." In a discreet, businesslike manner, Sophia replied, "What do you want?" "I'd like to make an appointment with you," in the same formal tone, he said, and felt it necessary to add, "A business meeting, of course. Your head is on vacation." "On vacation," she confirmed it. "Well then, all questions I solve with you as with, and oh, okay. What is it you'd like to discuss with me?" "Sophia, don't get your hopes up." With a slight chuckle in his voice, Parker replied, "We'll talk about it when we meet. I'll see you at 3 p.m. When Sophia went to the reception desk, the receptionist was absent. Strange, she thought, and knocked quietly on the office door. "Yes, yes," Sophia heard, a cheerful voice. "Parker," and opened the door. "Sophia, you've already arrived," he asked, and pointing to a soft chair next to a beautifully shaped magazine table, gallantly spoke, "Have a seat." "I will now." Sophia obediently sat down, and Thomas went into a funny room, which apparently served as a kind of kitchen, and came back with the payment and a bottle of champagne, not cheap, by the way. But there, he smiled. "That seems to be it now. What's all this for?" Sophia asked, and looking at the table, in the very center stood a small fruitcake, which, as far as she knew, could only be purchased in a restaurant. In addition to the cake, there were caviar cakes on the table, 3 different salads. What for? Thomas smiled broadly. "It's a business meeting. I find it easier to solve issues at a set table, so to speak, in a trusting atmosphere. What's cultured and efficient, don't you think?" "To be honest, I hadn't thought about it," the woman replied with a shrug. She was beginning to realize that a business meeting was out of the question. That was all she needed. Parker said emphatically, "Even in our backwater, culture is not a bad thing. Can't hurt." Sophia nodded. "What do I mean?" He rejoiced. "And then, when I make an appointment with a beautiful woman, no matter what the occasion, I always prepare for it properly. So what did you want to discuss with me?" She took the bull by the horns. She didn't like this business meeting. What if, God forbid, someone found out about it? A lot of things. Sophia replied nonchalantly to the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. For example, about how to raise the standard of living in the neighborhood. "And you want to discuss it with me personally," she grinned. "Why not?" And Parker steered the gas. "You live in cubicles, and therefore you know the problems of the village firsthand, don't you? Well, that's just it." Champagne, pouring. And what am I really boring, Sophia thought. After all, a new position is not only new responsibilities, but also new opportunities. There is an opportunity to drink champagne and talk about life with one of the department heads, so I'll make the most of it. How long can I sit in my village and not see the light of day? And if anyone sniffs, I have nothing to be ashamed of. If I don't allow it, it won't happen. I'm not a young secretary. That's the spirit. Approved Parker and poured champagne into glasses. "Well, very tasty." With a smile, said a colleague. "A nice drink. I love it." "I love it too," he nodded. You eat salads. Cake all in the restaurant ordered. Fresh, delicious. Surprisingly, but now the solid head of the department seemed Sophia so simple and homely. Probably that's how his family and friends knew him. It occurred to her, I wonder why he got divorced. and then she was ashamed of her thoughts. Why pry into someone else's life? Shall we do it again? Parker smiled, and not immediately heard Sophia, immersed in his own thoughts. I suggest we do it again. Is it just me, or are you tense? Everything is fine, assured the guest. I will gladly drink more champagne. Sophia, won't you be offended if the second toast is for you? The owner of the office asked not only jokingly, but also seriously. Why should it offend me? She was surprised. I don't know. Well, Thomas, champagne is good, of course. But let's get to why you invited me here. Sophia said in a businesslike tone. Our neighborhood, as you quite rightly pointed out, needs improvement. And when it comes to this particular booth, I have some thoughts. Parker grunted in surprise, but the guest smiled dazzlingly as if she hadn't noticed. We'll discuss it. The dinner was conducted in a strictly businesslike manner. Sophia realized that this was not what Parker was expecting, but there was nothing she could do to please him. He did not hint at a closer acquaintance, for he realized that he would receive a strong rebuff, and for a womanizer like Parker, that was simply unacceptable. It's embarrassing and humiliating. No, it's a gradual thing. Usually a couple of bottles of champagne was enough. I must say, the conversations about improving the standard of living in the neighborhood went well. Thomas listened to Sophia's proposal, and an hour later she called the driver. So soon. Parker stretched out disappointedly. But I guess that's the end of the matter. Corver waved her hands. He wanted to add that he had ordered a sauna, but he stopped talking. I wanted to say that you are absolutely right, smiled charmingly at the person in charge of working with citizens. I will certainly take into account all your wishes and, as they say, let's get to work. When the driver pulled up, Parker escorted Sophia to the car like a true gentleman. He wanted to kiss her hand, but came to his senses in time. Why gossip? It was one thing to spend time with a young and free employee like him, and quite another to spend time with a family woman, the deputy head of the administration. Parker gallantly opened Sophia's doors as the car moved off, admiringly thought this woman. Parker went up to his office, poured champagne, and thought deeply. The head of the department clearly understood this woman. He had a great hookup with his second wife, the same one who had a great career. Thomas had divorced 3 years ago and was no longer eager to remarry. Why should he? He never saw a woman as a free cleaning lady or a cook. But from time to time, he thought there was no need to marry. Parker was clean and, as far as time allowed, did not neglect cleaning. In addition, he was a good cook and knew a dozen interesting recipes for those who do not have time. And lately, Thomas was often ordering food from a restaurant. That's funny. What about the automatic washing machine? For what? Well, as for natural male needs, women who are ready for anything have not yet outlived someone, and serious status did not stop someone, not to mention young secretaries. Those, however, had their own interest in advancing their careers. But here Parker had an iron principle: he never made patronage to any of his own for chills. Have you tried studying? Lovely ladies. Parker had a daughter growing up from his second marriage. If he suddenly found out that Mila was trying to make a career through bed, she would be in trouble. He'd known Sophia Corver for a long time, but he'd hardly ever crossed paths with her. They used to say hello in the corridor of the district administration. Sophia was a good-looking woman back then. But he had plenty of that goodness, and he had plenty of that goodness. Thomas Parker knew perfectly well that he was considered a womanizer and did not deny it. But the people around him were wrong about something. Parker did not chase every skirt. Some quite pretty women didn't stand a chance. He didn't like or recognize vulgar and mercantile individuals at first sight. Young duck secrets didn't count. After all, youth and freshness are beyond competition. When Sophia was appointed deputy chairman of the village council, he considered it the right decision. Corver was not only an attractive woman, but also a conscientious worker and undoubtedly deserved the promotion. And after socializing with Corver, he appreciated her in every way. Suddenly, Parker thought that with such a woman I would like to live the rest of my life. And was surprised to think, what about his love of order? A culinary talent, a car, a machine, and a bunch of ladies for lovemaking. It's an interesting question, of course. The head of the Citizens Department suddenly laughed. To think he had been discovered, but not quite discovered. But for the first time in his life, a meeting with a woman had not gone according to the Parkers' scenario. And yet, despite this unfortunate circumstance, the mood was great. He'd enjoyed himself, and that was worth a lot. And as for the rest, well, as they say, there's bad luck for old men. And then Thomas Parker is not used to giving up without a fight. The more difficult the task, the more interesting it is. The head of the department, drank champagne and ate cake. And looking at his watch, he called the driver. "Would you be so kind as to sign this?" He said, "The traffic will start soon, and I'm tired as a dog." "Okay, Thomas. And your application is accepted and will be considered within 3 working days," said Sophia to another visitor. "Goodbye, goodbye," replied pensioner Frank. Sophia's head had been spinning all day since that private business meeting at the district administration a week had passed. Memories of it made Sophia smile. The man had spent on the road, champagne and hors d'oeuvres from the restaurant. And she was proud. What's pride got to do with it? She and Parker were in a purely working relationship, and she didn't think of anything else. And if that was the case, she should have made it clear to him right away. Sophia was sure that in a few days the head of the Citizens Affairs Department would forget about her. And he should have. "Sophia, the specialist Jenna told you this, and brought a small, pretty basket of blood roses into her office." "Thank you, Jenna," she nodded. Sophia already knew who the flowers were from. She felt uneasy. She had no idea how to react, and that made her feel uncomfortable. But at least I can call and say thank you, Sophia thought. "Glad you liked it," Parker replied. And there was a smile in his voice. There was an awkward silence. Sophia broke the silence. "Yes. And it would not be impertinent of me to invite you to dinner at the restaurant." "Thomas, I don't think it's necessary," Sophia replied firmly. "But why don't you really understand?" "I confess I don't. I'm a married woman. I'm in a position of authority and everything. And you, Thomas, have a tarnished reputation." He smirked. "In other words, a reputation as a womanizer." "Right. But I didn't say that," Sophia grinned back. "You don't have to say anything." "Sophia, it's just dinner." Parker didn't give up. She asked ironically. Of course, Thomas didn't hesitate. How could it not be? Suddenly, Sophia realized that she wanted to go to a restaurant. It seemed to her that she had recently fulfilled the norm of her former working life. So why not have a little celebration? I think I'd agree," Sophia said. True, Parker sounded genuinely happy. She thought again that the head of the Citizens Affairs Department, whom the neighborhood knows, and the one who was talking to her at that moment were 2 different people. "Yes," Sophia replied discreetly. Wonderfully received, Parker. Businesslike tone. "My driver will pick you up for bed at 5, she asked fearfully. "Yeah, what's the big deal? What time do I get home?" "Oh, Sophia," the colleague laughed. "You probably haven't heard anything yet. He has irregular working days, which is a common thing in your position. A working moment. Yes, only there's something else." "There's nothing." Sophia wanted to say that she didn't have the right dress, but thought it was unnecessary. In Sophia's opinion, a man shouldn't know about such things. She walked over to the large full-length mirror hanging in the study. What exactly is wrong with a suit? She thought. A dark blue pantsuit, intricate trim on the lapel and cuffs of the jacket. It looked very impressive. "I wish I had a little more makeup and jewelry. You can do without it. The gold trim looks pretty flashy. And I think there was an elegant and wide-brimmed hat in the closet." Sophia bought it recently, but never brought it home. But here it is ready to cheer up the evening ensemble, she thought. There is only one thing left to settle Nick. "I will be late tonight," Sophia told her husband. Suddenly she felt like a schoolgirl. "And what are these trips?" Cindy, the accountant, looked out of the window. "But what's not to be clear about?" snickered Jenna, escaping to the tea party hat flowers. "A driver at the end of the day. And you think about it." "Really?" The elderly accountant gasped. "And I thought she was decent." "She has such a good husband. A daughter. Well, give a man a diplomat, and he'll show his true colors." And everyone knows what goes on upstairs. They're all related, for God's sake. The specialist ranted. But our doggy's got it. That's right, the accountant nodded. Well, and then the sight of the little one, it seems, did not go in vain. After all, she's always oppressed Nick. Here is the result. Yes, Cindy sighed. And what a nice family they were, weren't they? Every dog in the stalls knew about the relationship between the math teacher and his mother-in-law. Moreover, it was one of the most discussed topics in the store, in the nurse's station, and of course, in the village administration. Well, now Sophia's colleagues had something to discuss. And in the light of recent events, it looked a little spicy. Cindy, please. Jenna rolled her eyes. Why worry about them? Nick, if anything, who will be there to comfort them. Everyone knows the vice principal's got a crush on him. Molly's a very attractive woman, by the way. Not like our duck. Yeah, it's like Santa Barbara all over again. The women laughed merrily and continued to grind the bones of the deputy head and the rest of the villagers. Sophia, I'm speechless. Parker exclaimed. I didn't mince words. Are you charming? Thank you, she smiled. What's the harm in that? It was a pleasure. But at the same time, a strange uneasiness settled in her soul. Maybe it was a premonition. What will you have to drink? Thomas asked. At your discretion? To be honest, I don't know much about wine. Then I'd recommend a Spanish wine, very bright, very tasty. Well then, let's have the Spanish wine. Sophia nodded. They drank the wine, which indeed turned out to be amazingly tasty. Ate shish kebab of sturgeon with spicy sweet sauce, and talked about everything in the world. Parker proved to be an interesting conversationalist, and the time flew by in a flash. My God, it was already 9:30. Sophia gasped, looking at her watch. They'll be worried at home. Thomas nodded understandingly. Well, of course, she replied and went to her purse for her phone. Where the hell did it go? Sophia cheerfully turned to her colleague. Wait a minute. Sophia waved Sophia away with annoyance, intending to dump the contents of her purse on the table. Sophia mockingly held out Parker. I apologize profusely for interrupting what appears to be a fascinating pastime, but maybe you're looking for this. He pointed with a smile to Sophia's cell phone lying on the table. And both of them, without conspiring, spluttered. Cheerfully, she said, Husband, you have not lost me. Well, great, I'll be there soon. Love you. Parker felt a prick of jealousy and sadly stated, well, I guess the banquet is over. Sophia waved her hands. It can't be helped. They're waiting for me at home. Well, if they are, when she entered the house, her husband was awake. Have you been drinking? Nick asked, looking at her intently. I had a drink, Sophia nodded. There was a small banquet after the administration meeting. Something was wrong. Was it Nick's imagination, or was there a challenge in his wife's last sentence? Why not? He shrugged. You're entitled. You weren't brought here under the arm. Yeah, the wife muttered. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Let's go to bed. The New Year's Eve corporate party for employees of the administration was prepared on a grand scale. A newly opened restaurant was engaged for this purpose. The conversations of the administration staff were all on the same topic. Ladies' outfits I have already looked through long, revealing with a cut to the thigh. But you're not wearing that kind of fire, not at my size. Oh, come on. It's not a problem. Put on a high-waisted dress and you'll be happy. You'll look slimmer and prettier, and you'll show off your legs. I want to wear red, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Girls, whose year is this? Secretaries, accountants, specialists, and higher-ranking employees resembled schoolgirls on the eve of a party. And it was a very pretty sight. Sophia, like her coworkers, was also racking her brains over what kind of outfit to buy to make everyone aha. Come on, mentally under the case, but on herself, so everyone. After that dinner at the restaurant, Sophia felt something had changed. She didn't know what it was yet, but it was obvious. And then there was that stare from Nick. Did he suspect something? There was nothing to suspect. She and Parker never saw each other again, since they were both busy with work on New Year's Eve. And yet, on Sunday, Sophia went into town to pick up her mom's dress. Well, that's so last century, Helen remarked. When the mother voiced her plans, that is, did not understand Sophia. So now everyone orders in online stores, right? Explained the girl. Yes, but what about trying it on? So it can be done at the point of delivery. Maybe, Sophia grinned. But I'm used to the old-fashioned way. You should. I will keep up with the times, she smiled and went outside. The weather was fantastic. It was warm and the snow was falling quietly. I wish we had this kind of weather at Christmas, Sophia thought dreamily and frowned. Most of the time the holidays were a challenge to her psyche. As usual, her mom would show up and start bad-mouthing Nick. What the hell? Rarely, very rarely without that cataclysm. Sophia suddenly pictured Parker in Nick's place and wondered, I wonder what kind of relationship they'd have with Mom. And the woman sighed heavily. She'd been thinking about him a lot lately. What was that about? Sophia reached the bus stop and said hello to her fellow villagers. The retired headmistress said hello and looked at her strangely. Some of the people standing at the bus stop followed her example and Sophia felt naked. What are they looking at? 5 minutes later, Sophia's bus pulled up. Please come in, Will said kindly. A student visiting his parents for the weekend. Thank you, Will. She smiled gratefully at the guy and suddenly heard someone murmur. Tell me, please, what honors? Sophia could have been mistaken, of course, but the voice seemed to belong to Anna, Betty's friend. She had sat with Anna more than once at the same table with relatives. Sophia had always thought that Betty's friend was quite nice to her. So what's the matter? There were those looks too. Sophia took her seat and decided to keep her head down. It was no secret to her that her appointment to a new position was received ambiguously by the people. Many were genuinely happy for Sophia, noting that but she deserved the promotion. But not without detractors. God only knows what they argued their discontent. But the fact remained that there were such people. But was it worth paying attention to them? You can't please everyone philosophically, Sophia summed up. For shopping, she chose a hypermarket 2 stops away from the bus station. The market was definitely not suitable for this purpose. Sophia walked through the boutiques. Her eyes were dazzled by the variety of colors and styles. The woman stopped at a marvelously beautiful evening dress, a relay of color and rice. It would go perfectly with her dark Russian hair and gray eyes. The dress cost more than half her paycheck, but it was so beautiful. And if you pictured it with newly bought shoes, clutch sharpening, and beautiful makeup, it was fire. To take it or not to take it? That was the question. Mentally paraphrased Sophia of the famous writer Sophia. She heard a painfully familiar voice, and that was the meeting. In front of her stood none other than Parker. Hello, confused woman said. What are you doing here? Having fun? Thomas asked. I'm just picking out a dress for corporate events. A necessary thing, he approved. How's that going? I haven't picked anything out yet, Sophia admitted. Why not? It's just something. I think this purple one is really nice, Parker said in a businesslike tone, and looking at the dress she was looking at. I think Sophia thought dejectedly too. But for the money it costs, you could live on it for almost a month. You know what? Why don't I give you this dress? Thomas suggested as if he were buying a candy bar. What did the coworker fearfully ask? No, that's out of the question. But I can see you like it. You don't, he said. Do you like it? Nodded Sophia. But it's very expensive. No, Thomas, I can't accept such a gift, she said firmly. No more than money. Parker wouldn't give up. Well, I can't take no for an answer. I need a hint. As if out of nowhere, a young salesgirl materialized. No. Sophia shook her head, stuttering with excitement. But her unexpected companion unhesitatingly declared and to tell, and to show, and it would be good to help to decide on the accompanying goods. Well, there are handbags, shoes. In general, you know yourself. And now the lady wants to try on this dress. The sales consultant looked questioningly at Sophia, and she nodded. She was already convinced that Parker knew how to insist. So was it really worth it? Grabbing her dress, Sophia left, for example. And when the colleague came out, he was speechless. Sophia, I'm blown away, Parker said. Is it really so terrible? She smiled. It's not. Just awful. Terrible, beautiful. No, it's a stunning dress. It really looks like it's made on you, the saleswoman said with a smile. I want to offer you these shoes. The girl took out of the box silk, lilac, pink shoes, decorated with bows with decorations. We'll take them from you too. Without giving Sophia a second thought, Thomas said, and you need a treasure too. So Sophia became the happy owner of dress shoes and elegant treasure. Reshed his fancy shimmer and crystals. Parker pulled out his credit card, and despite Sophia's protests, Sophia paid up. So uncomfortable, she slipped in pitifully. Uncomfortable, Thomas interjected. He looked at her strangely. Yeah, and if I offered to take you home in my car, that would be awkward too. And you want to suggest it, said Sophia in a thin voice, and not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I'll insist. And not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I will insist. Then you better say yes right away, she grinned, determined to pay him back for all this splendor at the first opportunity. Right. The colleagues left the hypermarket, not realizing that she was watching them. Cinderella's friend Sophia. Here is my carriage, Thomas said proudly, opening the door. Parker drove a dark cherry-colored Ford. The car looked brand new. He added, as if reading Sophia's mind, It's beautiful. I like it too. Parker nodded and sighed, asking Sophia, Don't you think something is happening to us? Actually, she didn't think there was anything going on with them. But Sophia was more worried about something else. What to do about it, I don't know, she said quietly. Not true, Parker whispered, leaning toward Sophia. He gently took the woman's chin and looked into her eyes as if asking her something. Sophia covered her eyes for a moment, as if answering him yes, and in just a second, they broke. Oh, like schoolboys, Parker laughed a few minutes later, and Sophia was in complete agreement with him. Now she felt like a schoolgirl who had kissed for the first time in her life, and now she was afraid that her mom would find out and scold her. Except that it was not only about mom, but also about her husband and daughter. It was about them first of all, though it's unlikely the mom is either. Wendy, despite the contrast with Nick, would approve of her daughter's behavior. And so it was when Parker brought Sophia home. Her husband wasn't with her daughter. That was good for her. It was embarrassing to face them. And the next day, it seemed that everyone in the village knew that Sophia Corver had come home with some guy in a car. She was sitting in her office drinking coffee when her mother called. What the hell are you doing? Going off the deep end? Wendy's on a roll. So Sophia thought doomfully. I think it's starting. If until yesterday she had nothing to hide, now the situation had changed. It's not proper for a married woman to make out in a car with her face. However, it's all yours too. Good morning, Mom, Sophia said calmly. And you are sure that it is good, gargled, and the mother of the whole village only says that you were brought yesterday by car. Well, what's criminal about it? She asked in a friendly manner. What's criminal about it? Yelled Wendy. So the daughter took the phone away from her ear to ride in a car with someone else's man. That sounds normal to you? Mom slowed down and said, Sophia, riding around with another man's man. Maybe it's not normal. Only I did not ride and came home with a colleague whom I met in the city and who bought you a dress and shoes. Mother interrupted me. Aren't you ashamed to accept gifts from a man? It makes things more complicated. It's a loan, she said. The first thing that came to mind, a loan. The old woman asked incredulously. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about a paycheck yet. And we have a corporate party in 3 days. Sophia lied inspirationally. We're going to a new restaurant. We're going out with the district administration. So you have to be on your best behavior. What did I tell you? Your husband doesn't know how to make money. Do you need to be on top of your game right now? And not just at the New Year's Eve party. Why don't we come to the party? It would have been a dime a dozen. Mom, what's the point of this? She sighed tiredly. You know what time he comes? Oh, it's been a long time. With annoyance, said Wendy. I wish you well. Do you? What's in it for me? What do you want? I want you to get your husband up to look for a part-time job, or better yet, another job. Sophia laughed, glad that the conversation had moved on to a less sensitive topic. And where is she in the village? That's another job. if only to become a laborer. You could start your own business, he grumbled. After all, he's a mathematician. Just knowing math isn't enough. You need an entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't have one. She summed it up triumphantly. What did she have to prove? You got a worthless man. Mom, let's figure out our family life on our own sometime. For probably the 1000th time, Sophia said. And anyway, I have to work. So bye. And in the evening, she had a talk with her husband. Sophia, while Helen is out walking, we need to talk. He didn't waste time with the preface. Well, we need to, then we need to. I agree, Sophia nodded, realizing what the conversation would be about. Nick had been ready for a serious conversation since morning, and now he didn't know how to start. Not sure where to start. She assumed, and I'll get you a paper. You heard that idiotic rumor that I got a ride home from some guy in a foreign car. And now you want to hold me accountable. Why would you want to hold me accountable? Peacefully hummed husband. I just want to understand the situation and understand. We're still a family. Sophia, I've always been honest with you, so I think I can expect the same. Yes, of course, Sophia nodded. But I have nothing to repent of. I always thought you were above gossip. I was wrong. And I can't have this conversation, Nick said thoughtfully. And his wife thought that he was probably right. What's the point of talking about it? Nick, there's nothing to talk about, she exclaimed. He had a ride. I don't deny it. But it wasn't some guy, it was a colleague, the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. I met him by chance at the hypermarket. And he drove me home. That's it. So he went to the village on purpose to take you home. Nick squinted incredulously. And before that he bought himself an expensive dress and something to go with it. The situation is more serious than Sophia realized. I wonder how much she'll find out later. What if Nick got wind of that kiss in the car? Desperate, she thought to Dawn. The windows were tinted, and the car was far from the parking lot, but still. And who the hell was following me? Sophia ordered herself to be calm. If anyone knew about that kiss, her mother would have mentioned it. Wendy's daughter had kept silent about it. Anyway, calm is only calm. Oh, we know so much, Sophia shook her head. But since you have an informant, he should have reported to you that my mysterious admirer bought me this dress on credit. On credit. Yeah, why are you surprised? Well, what if you hadn't met him? Nick, you should be an interrogator, grinned the wife. If I hadn't met him, I would have bought a cheaper dress or called someone. There'd be more questions. Sorry, crushed, muttered Nick. Sophia walked over to her husband and stroked his hair. With a smile, she said, let's just forget about it. And let it be the worst thing that happened to us. I agree, he smiled back and intercepted his wife's hand and kissed it. I see you have peace, friendship, love, cheerfully said the daughter who came in. Did you expect us to fight here? Her mother asked with a grin. No, Helen shook her head. It's just nice to see once again that the parents are doing well. The girl undressed and went to her room. I heard what she said. Sophia said quietly, so we'll try to fit in. With tenderness, said her husband. Sophia tried her best to fit in and seemed to succeed. She ignored the general message for the entire 3 days, remaining before the corporate party at the restaurant. Parker the trips to the district administration with Sophia was entrusted to Jenna, arguing that she was busy, which, however, was true. She answered his calls dryly and one syllable, letting him know that they could only have a business relationship and nothing more. And after the new year, the head will come out of vacation, and everything will be back to normal. Good, Sophia thought with relief. It didn't cost me anything. That's just it. The restaurant, where the corporate party was held, had been opened recently, so it looked untouched and somehow uninhabited. Perhaps it was the high-tech style of the place. Sophia suddenly felt like a snow queen in her ice kingdom. Not to give away, only she guessed that the gossip about her and Parker came from the native village council. And now the co-workers were clearly eager for it to continue. Sophia decided she would not give them that pleasure. She kept talking about her work, had fun, danced, enjoyed delicious food and drinks, and did not give away her desire to approach Parker, and ideally to torture herself with him and repeat that kiss again and again. May I invite you gallantly, gave her his hand. Michael, the head of the agriculture department, and Sophia nodded with a smile. Tonight was going to be fun, and Sophia was having fun. She settled into her seat and found herself a cold soda. And 5 minutes later, a security officer came up to her and asked her to dance as well. Our Sophia is a real hot commodity, commented Cindy the accountant. And Parker is not without tears. Her assistant Nina chuckled. The head of the Citizens Affairs Department poured one drink after another and from time to time cast hateful glances at Sophia. And when the security officer, as befitted a true gentleman, escorted the lady to her seat at the table, Parker approached her with a firm step. The audience froze in anticipation of a dance performance. With forbidding language, he suggested Sophia. "Thomas, are you sure?" She said with a polite smile. "Maybe you should sit down. I decide what's best for me." Parker said, "But we're on a first-name basis." "No," Sophia blurted out, and the almost inferior crowd perked their ears at you. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Michael tried to defuse the situation. It's okay. Who doesn't? A man's had a little too much to drink. It's just an everyday thing. Let's call a cab. But who has a cell phone nearby? An administration employee from a neighboring village readily took out a phone from her purse and started dialing the number of the cab service, and Michael felt it necessary to warn. And without any stupid woman's gossip, I'll rip my tongue out myself. To say the audience was disappointed was to say nothing. The cab arrived 5 minutes later. Parker was escorted to the car and the fun continued. Sophia could physically feel the stares of her colleagues, and after a while she hurriedly turned away, citing the headache. The next day, Parker sent Sophia a message apologizing for her behavior. Apology accepted. Happy New Year. Was it written? Christmas was spent alone with Nick. Wendy went to a sanatorium on a voucher for pensioners, and Helen, having met Christmas and scared in a salad, went to celebrate the holiday in the company of classmates. "You know," said Nick, "I've wanted to celebrate Christmas with you for a long time. But there's always someone else around." Sophia said cheerfully, "Or someone will show up." That New Year's Eve, the Corver couple felt young and hopeful for the first time in a long time. They chatted merrily and had a delicious meal. Ice-cold champagne, they recalled carefree youth, the time of the courtship, the wedding, the news of the long-awaited addition to the family, the birth. Knees? Yeah, it was great. Sophia smiled as she sipped her champagne. "Do you remember how you gave me cosmetics and golden balls?" "You bet I do." Her husband laughed. "It was you from Grandma's paratrooper." "Oh, and hit me then." And the old lady, by the way, had a heavy hand. That night, nobody came to see them. Sophia guessed why. But she didn't care about that now. Let them watch their families. Sophia thought, falling asleep in Nick's arms. "I have the coolest husband in the world, and we have a wonderful daughter. The New Year's holidays are relaxing after all." Sophia tried to concentrate on her work, but it was not going well. The same thing seemed to be happening with the other employees. She went to Paulina's office and, with annoyance, noting that she was not there, went to the accounting department. And so it was. Together with Irina and Veronica again. "They're washing someone's bones, Jenna. I asked you to prepare the certificates this morning," said Sophia. "Where are they?" "I'm leaving in 10 minutes. Are you going to sign for me?" Jenna reluctantly got up and went to her office. And the deputy manager saw the car and left. "I'll be there soon." When Sophia entered the agriculture department, she ran into Parker there. "Oh, Sophia, in my honor," he smiled. "How are you?" "How was the holidays?" "Thank you. All good." "Choppy," Sophia replied. Excuse me. I have to go." "Yeah, sure, we'll talk again." Thomas sounded a little too meaningful. She soon realized what the tone meant. The agricultural department in Sophia informed her that she was to be sent to the regional center. "For how long?" she asked. "For 24 hours, answered the head of the department. "You will get your daily allowance in the accounting department and come straight to me." "Okay," Sophia nodded and left the office. "I guess you already know." Thomas entered the office with a smile. "What do you mean?" "And business trips, of course," he shrugged. When Sophia returned to the agricultural department, she learned that she was traveling with Parker. She was terribly tempted to refuse, but under what sauce would she do it? And then, if she refused, it would give the department head some interesting ideas. And Sophia wouldn't want that. She's had enough of the New Year's Eve party. Surely the cuckoos, despite the warnings, were already scratching their tongues. Sophia went on a business trip with Parker. This trip was the beginning of their passionate affair. Both realized there was no point in hiding your feelings under lock and key. And be honest, was this trip in your prayers? Sophia asked, snuggling into his shoulder. But what was I supposed to do? Thomas sighed, pretending to sigh. You were avoiding me. And then there was that stupid corporate party. Drunk like an idiot. Wanted a bloody. What's going to happen now? She said thoughtfully. And everything depends on us. I want to be with you if you become my wife. Then the gossips won't dare say a word. Well, that's true. But Nick? What about Nick? Isn't Nick a little boy who'll get over it? He's not old yet. He'll find someone else. You just shook your head. Sophia. Oh, sweetheart. I've been divorced twice. And as a person with experience, I can say that there's really nothing terrible about it. It's more of a people thing. To me, it's really simple. If the marriage has come to an end, there is no point in saving it, and it is better to try to become happy again. And if there's someone you want to be with, then God knows what to do. You're probably right, she agreed. But you see, I don't have that experience, and it's really hard and uncomfortable for me. I understand, with sympathy, Parker said. Helen is graduating from high school this year, Sophia continued. She's looking forward to graduation and having her mom and dad present together. They are together, being divorced. No, Jen, I'm not ready to make that decision yet. You don't have to, he smiled. Just to be near. And there, as they say, there will be a day, there will be food. Thank you for what? For understanding. Believe me, it's not easy for me, Thomas sighed. But I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. A year passed. On Helen's birthday, all the relatives gathered at the Corver house. If Betty held a grudge against her brother, she prudently kept it to herself. She had come to congratulate her niece, and everything else was none of her business except the relatives and closest family friends. The party was attended by half of her classmates, the celebrant, and 2 friends from the university she had safely entered. Nick and Sophia were only too happy to welcome their daughter's new friends into their hospitable home. From the outside, everything looked the same as before, but only externally. Sophia, I was still seeing Thomas, and every day he got more and more insistent that she should divorce Nick and live with him one day. Parker said, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of this conspiracy. What could she say? Sophia was even worse for leading a double life for a year. What kind of nerves do you have to have? Except that sometimes it seemed to Eugenia that it was easier and easier for her. Sophia exclaimed in amazement when the lover voiced it. Do you think I should lie to the man I love in my own way? Yes, I do. At least as the father of my daughter, it's easier. You think so highly of me. That's when they had their first fight. Thomas apologized for a long time. Her heart shook. Then followed a rather long conversation, during which Sophia decided to tell her husband about the divorce when Lunk turned 18. And so that day came, and Sophia realized with annoyance that she couldn't decide to tell Nick about the divorce. Sophia, but no one pulled you by the tongue. Parker pointed out. Did you make this decision on your own? I don't want to pressure you in any way. But if you don't do what you said you do, I'll start thinking that you don't know how to keep your word. You're right, she said. But I need a little time. How much time is a little time? Thomas squinted. Zen, but we're not in a market. All right. He held up his hands as if in surrender. All right, I'll wait a little longer. I don't know what you're waiting for. Kate, who worked in the registry office, said perplexed. The women had become friends over the year, and Kate was the only person who knew the details of their relationship. She was Thomas's childhood friend, by the way. Sophia was jealous at first, but then she realized there was nothing to fear. If Kate and Thomas didn't have an affair when they were young or even when they were older, it was unlikely to happen at all. What are you waiting for? She repeated, "You love him. He loves you. So what's the problem?" Thousands of couples marry and divorce. So you're not the first, you're not the last. Nick, that's a shame. What about Helen? Sophia shook her head at her friend. Do you feel sorry for everyone? But the farther into the forest, the more wood. If you want to know, I've never seen Thomas like that. For him, relationships with women have always been a kind of sporting competition. Really, every woman was like a victory for him. And with you, everything changed and Sophia made up her mind. Nick, we need to talk, she said. Her heart was beating like crazy, but there was nowhere to retreat to. At that moment, Nick was feeling the same thing. All this time, he was subconsciously waiting for this conversation. After all, he didn't live on Mars. However, deep down, Nick hoped that it was just an affair. Sonia will outweigh it, and everything will be the same. Turns out, no. Nick, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Yeah, around. I'm leaving. Sophia suddenly felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. Wow, turns out this isn't scary at all. What was I expecting? I can't say I'm happy. But now that you've made up your mind, Nick, you're a wonderful you. Oh, don't do that, he wrinkled his nose. As they say, here's God. And here's the threshold, and there's nothing more to talk about. I'm going tomorrow. Not believing her happiness, said Sophia. As you wish. The next day, she moved into town to Parker's house. Come in, he fussed. We're going to celebrate. I'm not divorced yet. Sophia laughed, but it's only a matter of time. Thomas's apartment was spacious and bright, and looked nothing like a bachelor pad. Everything has been meticulously cleaned, interior cut, the work of a top-notch designer. Pleased, the host pointed toward the hall, where Sophia was waiting for a sumptuously set table. In the very center stood a goose with apples, and there was an Olivier salad, a salad of shrimp, avocado, and egg bindings with a creamy seafood assortment sauce. Miniature chocolate cakes with whipped cream. What restaurant did you order from? Sophia asked. What restaurant? Pretend. Thomas was indignant. With the exception of the cakes, I made everything myself. My favorite woman moved in. Good girl. She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. So what are we waiting for? I'm hungry like a wolf. What will you have? Wine, cognac, champagne. Well, I'll have a whiskey, said Parker, and the lovers began their meal. How delicious, Sophia said with admiration, tasting the sleeve salad. It's from Italian cuisine. I like it very much too. Do you know what my dream is? Asked Thomas after the second toast, which was to love. And what's that? To meet your daughter. Sophia's soul was singing. Today she called Helen and informed her of the impending divorce. To her great relief, her daughter was very understanding. I'll introduce you, Sophia promised. For the second time in the last 24 hours, she was surprised at how simple everything was. But unfortunately, it wasn't. After the divorce, Nick became addicted to alcohol. At first, he'd have a drink or two after work. But as time went on, things took a serious turn. One day, Nick showed up at school with a bad hangover, for which he was sharply reprimanded by the principal. The mathematician apologized and said it wouldn't happen again. Kelly, he's not really drunk. The vice principal stood up for him. At least the man had some drama in his personal life. Who doesn't? The principal grinned. Even for students was not a secret that Molly has long been unevenly breathing to the math teacher. And here was such an opportunity to win the man of her dreams. And to say the vice principal had been a widow for 6 years. All right, Kelly relented. On your, Molly, responsibility. But if this happens again, I'm gonna have to talk to you differently, Nick. I hope you understand what I mean. I do, replied the mathematician briefly. Well and good. Let's get on with our work. The incident never happened again. And a couple of months later, after a corporate birthday party, they decided to continue the banquet at Nick's. The cell phone was ringing off the hook, and Alex, the gym teacher, exclaimed in anger. Yours, that's the one. With annoyance nodded Alex. So calmed down. To hell with her. Alex, you're 100% wrong, said Nick. Do you know what this is called? What do we have? We don't keep it when we lose it. Oh, poor or what? Colleagues drank a shot each, and the gym teacher remarked, "But freedom." "Fuck that freedom," Nick said with tears in his voice. "When I see Sofiaka coming to work with his whip, I'm ready to kill him." "And why him?" Alex grinned. "There, I think your mother-in-law did her best, and ours was talking to the whole village about how worthless he was. But apparently her words fell on fertile ground." The coworker left, and Nick continued his outpourings in proud solitude. Alex's words about his mother-in-law's contribution to the divorce did not go out of his head, and he went to his ex-mother-in-law's house drunk and made a scandal. "It's all your fault, you old witch," he yelled, flashing his eyes. "Why?" Wendy said nonchalantly. 3. You always said I was worthless." That said, confirmed the older woman. "Wasn't she?" And Nick couldn't keep a woman. "So it's the mother-in-law's fault. Well done. I'm you old witch," threateningly said the former son-in-law and approached Wendy. "Help, they're killing me." She paid with a voice not her own and ran out of the house. "Nick, what are you doing?" shouted Betty, who came over. The neighbor told her that a drunken Nick had gone to his ex-mother-in-law's house. And the woman followed, just as long as he didn't do anything. "I'll get her now," yelled the math teacher. "I'll go to the district police officer." The old woman continued to yell. "And such a person teaches children at school. Ah, disgusting. Fucking alcoholic. You can be sure I won't let it go." "Wendy, honey, I'm so sorry, for God's sake." Betty begged her tearfully. "You understand. I'll get on my knees to you, but don't go to the police station. To hell with you." The old woman came in with her and, cautiously squinting at her brother-in-law, went into the house, and Betty took her brother home, exhorting him that life doesn't end after divorce. "I love her," Nick interjected to his sister. "You know I love her." Betty just sighed heavily and thought, "And they say women are stupid." A few days later, the story reached the education department, and the question of firing the mathematician arose. Colleagues were divided into those who argued that such behavior is completely unacceptable for a teacher, and those who supported Nick. By the way, Sophia, feeling guilty before the former spouse, stood up in his defense. She tried by all means to persuade the education officer not to use such drastic measures. But alas, as a result, Nick was left without a job. "He'll be lost," Sophia lamented. "Don't exaggerate," replied Thomas. "After all, he is a grown man, an intellectual. I think he will pull himself together in time." "Oh, I don't know." I sighed. "You know what she was thinking. Just promise me you won't take it personally." "I get scared when you talk like that," Parker admitted. "Yes, and it's really not a big deal. Anyway, maybe it makes sense to postpone the wedding." "Why would I do that? I don't see any joy in that." Sophia's on. "Yeah, I've been living like a hot frying pan. I'm probably the only lazy person who doesn't say behind my back, I've driven a man crazy. And they don't give a rat's ass about me trying to help him. And I still got a job to do, by the way." "Well, the job isn't exactly a problem," Thomas said. "There's a specialist in the civil registry office about to retire." "Why? Will you look for a good option and work?" "Kate didn't tell me anything about that," she wondered. "But you would. When was the last time you saw each other?" "About a couple weeks ago," Sophia recalled. "But you see, the position's only been open for a week. I think we should hold off on the wedding after all. But think about it. Nick is in this situation, and I'm getting married. And you're like salt in the wound. Zen, but after all, we're living together." "Well, okay, whatever you say," Parker gave in. In the end, they decided to postpone the wedding for a month. Nick felt empty and cold. His parents had passed away one by one many years ago. The wife he loved and idolized had left him for someone else. The daughter was studying to be a journalist in a regional city, and Nick was clear that Helen would not return to her native village, what with her profession here to do. With a sigh, he thought, except to visit, and now he didn't have a job either. Nick called his daughter almost every day, and Helen supported her father as best she could. She said that the divorce was not the end of life, and that Nick would still find happiness. In general, everything they usually say in such cases. "If you want to come to my place," the daughter said. I'm working part-time now and renting an apartment. No, really, the only other person who supported him in any way was his sister Betty. You should come more often, she said. Why do you have to sit alone? Nick nodded uncertainly. What? Yeah, shouted the sister. Have you eaten at all today? I don't remember. He doesn't remember. But he remembered to get a bottle. Nick, but what are you turning into? The woman said in despair. Listen, why don't you stay with us? You'll come to your senses, and then we'll see what to do with you. Maybe we can find you a job. And Nick, Betty, he said quietly. Leave me alone. I'm sick enough as it is. The sister thought for a moment and walked out with a sigh. She walked home and thought about how easy it was to break something that had taken years to build up. Unlike her friend Anna, Betty was far from judging her former sister-in-law. But how painful it was to see past and washed-up addition Sophia while Nick trivialized. Betty approached the house and saw Anna sitting on a bench. Hi, her friend said with a smile. I'm here to see you. Well, hello, sighed Betty and invited Anna into the house. The women came into the kitchen and the hostess offered them tea. What tea is there? Betty waved it off. There's a lot going on here. And how can it be without special interest? Betty asked. Frankly speaking, she had enough of what was going on in their family. I heard the latest news was righteous anger, exclaimed Anna. Your ex was transferred to the civil registry office. In my opinion, quite logically shrugged the landlady. After all, she lives in the city. And most likely, it is inconvenient for her to go to work in the village. But for me, it's much simpler. She just had a guilty conscience. Her friend declared triumphantly. So what's the matter? Betty grinned. So she has one. And I'll tell you something else. She postponed the wedding because of what happened to the can. But what a noble thing to do, huh? Anna shook her hands. Yes, they are without a stamp in the passport. They have been married for more than a year, and they live together. Not a big sacrifice. Betty suddenly felt incredibly disgusted. It felt like someone had tainted the air in the house. And you know what, Anne? After a little silence, she said, Go away. She was stunned. I don't get it. Are you defending her or something? Well, Betty didn't expect it. I mean, Nick is your brother Nick's brother. Not only am I his sister, but I'm also a woman. And as a woman, I understand Sophia. Maybe it's not love at all. But right now, at this moment, the pig is attracted to this man. Judgment. Who are we? Life will judge us. You go away. Nick kept drinking. Now he was living on the principle that a day had passed and it was all right. That's how it is. The villagers said. What a good family they had, eh? You can't be sure of anything. It seemed that it couldn't get any worse. But the worst was ahead. Nick, a former non-smoker, picked up the habit. And then one day, what Betty had feared would happen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The young woman, as if anticipating trouble, sat on the terrace and sold not cheerful thoughts. And when Betty smelled smoke, she realized with some sixth sense that Nick's house was on fire. She went to the wicket from where the house where her brother lived was clearly visible and made sure that her hunch was correct. Fire. At the top of her voice wailed Betty and skipped to Nick on the move dialing the emergency number. When Betty ran up to her brother's house, the fire was slowly but surely growing. Without thinking, the woman kicked the door open with her foot. She ran into the house, where she got the strength from. She wet a rag and sold into her brother's bedroom and began to shake him. Wake up, you idiot, screamed Betty. Is your house on fire? Sister forcefully pushed Nick and beckoned him toward the exit. The woman realized that every second counted another tug, and they were outside and just in time to fall to the grass. Betty saw the ceiling collapse. Before she lost consciousness, she thought she had made it just in time. People were running from all sides. The house where Nick had been happy for almost 20 years was extinguished quickly. But to restore it required a lot of money, which he didn't have. In fact, it was not even a question of restoration, but almost a full-fledged construction. Nick moved in with his sister. Michael helped them with household chores, planted potatoes, and willingly helped the children to do their homework. The youngest from the bench had a math problem. Nick stopped drinking. The house Betty lived in with her husband and 2 sons wasn't that big. So Nick couldn't help but realize that he had to come up with a place to live. But what could he think of? The village council only shook their hands, for there were no empty houses in the village. One day, Nick heard Michael ask his wife if he was moving at all. If he'd gone on a shift, it would have been good for him. We're not millionaires. He felt bad about embarrassing his sister and brother-in-law. That's why Nick thought it was a good idea. Except there was no money on the phone to go online, Betty. I hate to ask you for anything, but could you spare some for a poor hobo? 300, he asked his sister. Nick had been calling himself a hobo lately, either jokingly or seriously. What's that for? With suspicion, Betty asked. And has your brother been drinking? Don't worry, you're past that. Nick assured her with a grin. I want to look for a job ad. How long do I have to sit on your neck? Well, I'll get it for you. A couple days later, he found an ad for shift workers. When are you leaving? Betty asked. In a week. Nick called his daughter before he left. I'm happy for you, Helen exclaimed. I've been having all kinds of bad thoughts lately, but thank God you're okay. I should come visit you sometime. What do you think? We'll see, the father replied evasively. Nick was ashamed to admit to his daughter that the house where she spent her childhood was no longer there. The ex-wife apparently didn't know anything about it either. After all, Sophia now worked in the city and did not maintain relations with any of the villagers. Thomas and Sophia were 3 days away from getting married. I can't wait for you to say yes to me in the face of the law, said the happy groom. The future spouses were having lunch at the very cafe where they had met at the hardware meeting. The faces of the bride and groom were shining and the people around them were smiling. I look at you and directly infect with good mood, said the former to them Lola, head of the Department of Media Relations. Are you so cool? Thank you for your kind words, smiled Parker. The daughter arrived the evening before the wedding of moms. You could put your face on the cover, Helen exclaimed, kissing her mother. You look like $1 million. $1 million? Sophia smiled embarrassedly. Right. Why am I being petty for $1 million? Oh, come on. With a laugh, she waved her daughter away. You are not hungry. I could eat an elephant, cheerfully admitted Helen. But I can't promise an elephant, Sophia hummed. But fried chicken, and I'll feed you. Come on, encouraged the girl. Almost a year of studenthood. I gave her a lot of fried chicken, but such a delicious Tina, as my mother, has not yet met. I hope the groom appreciated. By the way, where did he appreciate it? Did he appreciate it at the bachelor party now? Mother smiled. He, like you, was not afraid to let go. What about the cake stripper and other bachelor party trappings? You know, not afraid. I don't think our Thomas Stepanovich can be surprised by strippers anymore, or anything else for that matter. I'm very glad I got him for goulash. What about Daddy's sadness? Helen asked. It always seemed to me that you loved each other so much that there is no stronger. It did not seem. The daughter answered Sophia seriously. That's the way it was. But I guess our love just ran out of steam. It happens like that too. But I am grateful to Vanya that he was in my life. By the way, you called him a long time ago. The other day. How is he? He seems to be doing well. He's away on a shift. Oh well, God forbid he's doing well. There's a very nice woman coming, and we'll drink to that. Winked Sophia, the daughter's bachelorette party. Helen smiled understandingly. Or else. Mother and daughter laughed amicably. And then Kate showed up. The bachelorette party was a success. The next day, Thomas and Sophia became husband and wife. Wendy looked at her daughter under her dress with a concentrated frown. One could only wonder what grievances she would express to her new son-in-law. Nick returned from his shift a month later with a lot of money and a great mood. It would be better to solve the problem with housing. The tramp had arrived. He announced his arrival. Fresher, better looking, Sister said approvingly. The work has done you good. Very much so. I'll have to do something about the house. There'll be daylight. There'll be food. The housing problem solved itself. And not just housing. In the morning, Nick went fishing in the neighboring village. The fish pecked and not bad. And Corver learning to cook, which Betty was a great master. But the stars had prepared something more interesting for Nick. He pulled the rod, but it was obviously caught on something. Shit. Nick cursed and bent his lice and fell into the water. He surfaced. And headed for the shore, pulling the fish boat up behind him. Nick was walking through the village soaking wet and carrying a bag with a still living fish in it. But there was no cell phone in his pocket. Drowned in the river, and Nick, he heard a woman's voice. "What are you doing here?" "Molly?" Nick exclaimed in surprise. "Unexpected. Yes, I came to go fishing." In fact, in their meeting, by and large, there was nothing unexpected. He knew that the head teacher had a mother living in the village. "And yet how did you manage to get so far away?" Molly asked. "The boat overturned." With a smile he answered. And the former colleagues could not help laughing. "That's what the amateur fishermen," said coworkers. "And went to my place before the bus is still more than 3 hours. And it is cool outside. And it's comfortable enough." There was no one in the house except Molly. The head teacher gave him a t-shirt and a tracksuit, not forgetting to put the kettle on. "I believe your mother lives here too." Nick showed his knowledge. "She did," sighed her colleague. "Mom died 9 days yesterday. She came here to sort out her things. But what to do with the house? I don't know. My mom was very sick, and just before she left, she gave me a deed of gift. So they're thinking of selling it or keeping it for Ethan. The guy wanted to get married. At least he'd have a place to bring his wife. Ethan was Molly's son. He was a year older than Helen and went to Polytechnic. Would you let the tramp stay here?" Nick asked. "What vagrant?" "The mistress of the house-me." Sadly, he replied. "You know probably that I'm having dinner at my sister's, but I'm tired of embarrassing them. Don't worry, I'll pay. Yesterday I came back from a shift. I made good money. And then I'll find a place to live." "What money?" Molly waved her hands. "You can live, of course, as long as you need." "Was it a nice house?" "A big one with 2 vegetable gardens, a garage, outbuildings, and a nice garden. Nick took good care of the house, for which Molly was very grateful. Another question is who should thank whom?" Nick grinned. When the landlady told him to thank you, she took in a hobo. "Well, what kind of tramp are you?" Molly objected. "Just a man in temporary difficulty." She visited the mother house almost every day. Both the residents and the child began to guess what was the matter. A fiancé had shown up. "Why are you, Molly, frequenting the village?" One day the sales clerk remarked. "I wonder if you're going to move there." "Who knows?" The widow smiled enigmatically. And when the villagers found out who was staying with her, everything fell into place. But Nick made no move to get closer. The coworkers began to speak to each other. But it didn't go any further than that. Molly realized that her lodgers needed time. After all, the man had recently gone through a difficult divorce. It was all settled on Christmas Eve. Molly's back from corporate. Beautiful, dressed up, new haircut. "You look good." Approvingly, Nick said. "That hair looks really good on you." All the men must have craned their necks. "Maybe," she smiled. "But it doesn't make any difference to me. And who's going to wring the neck of a drunkard who's old enough to be my son?" "Well, there is also a physicist," sneered Corver. "True, I think so. Doesn't distinguish a man from a woman anymore." "Well, you see," Molly waved her hands and laughed merrily. "Well, I think that women are always pleased with a man's attention. You like ears. Do you?" The widow asked quietly, looking Nick in the eye. "I love with my heart," he whispered back. The heart of the woman, tired of loneliness, anxiously went down. Did it mean that Nick's heart was not free and it still belonged to Sophia? And yet there was still a tiny hope. "The best counselor is the heart," Nick continued, catching her gaze. Now they were looking at each other. Molly suddenly realized she had a chance. Nick nestled against the woman's warm cheek, and he physically felt his heart thaw. And when their lips met, the man realized he was finally cured and ready to start life anew. "You are very beautiful," Nick whispered, hardly tearing himself away from her cop. Molly only smiled. She wished if Nick told her that, then things would work out for them. Nick and Molly spent that Christmas alone together. They didn't need anyone. They talked about everything in the world, made plans, and they had the best time of their lives. "How you celebrate Christmas is how you spend it," Nick said with a smile. pouring the rest of the champagne. So don't get your hopes up. It's easy to get rid of me. At least for the next year. Outside the window, it was already starting to get matchmaking. And the lovers were thrilled to see not only the coming year together, but also the dawn. Both saw it as a good omen. Could it have been any different on this magical night? I hope it doesn't happen in the next 20 years. Molly said quietly, snuggling into his shoulder. Well, that's a bit pessimistic. Nick stretched out with courtly disappointment. Here's the 30th thing. Molly, well, marry me. I realize I have nothing to offer you yet, but I promise it's only a matter of time. I have grand plans for this year, and shut up, Molly whispered, placing her fingers on his lips. If you were a beggar, I'd still say yes. I'm not a beggar. It's just him. I'm a tramp. My favorite tramp. To us, to our happiness. They drank champagne and went to bed. In the afternoon, a blizzard broke out. Nick shook his head sweetly. Shall we shovel the snow? And why do you want to yawn on a holiday? Asked Molly. My joy. It's only half an hour's work. Then it's gonna snow even more. And then you and I will have a drink. Some wine. Nick went out into the yard and took a shovel, as suddenly he saw how the ambulance, which had left from the side of the cabins, drove into a snowdrift and began to tow frantically. The driver got out of the cab and started looking around nervously. The doctor followed him out, and the men began to gesticulate frantically. Nick picked up a shovel and rushed to the car, which was about 200 meters away. Men. Do you need help? He asked, out of breath. How else? Exclaimed the doctor. There's an elderly woman with a stroke. We can't bring the old lady. The driver got into the car. Nick started shoveling, and the doctor tried to push the car out. Damn this blizzard. He cursed in his monologue with an expletive. The doctor pushed open the door of the patient compartment. Nick peered inside, and his hair stood on end. On the couch lay his ex-mother-in-law. Her mouth was curved to the left. One eye was closed, the other staring blankly into space. A nurse sat next to the older woman. Wendy blurted out to Nick. Do you know her? Asked the doctor. I do, exhaled Corver. And who is she to you? How's that? Do you have any contact with your ex-wife? No, shook his head Nick. I changed my cell phone not too long ago, but also. And the son, spat the doctor contemptuously. Drunk and sneaking around, I think he'll wake up and not remember that his mother was taken to the hospital, and he flatly refused to accompany. I can tell the daughter. It dawned on him the only number Nick remembered by heart. It was Helen's number. Notified, the doctor asked, and Corver suddenly thought he might not be able to reach his daughter. It's Christmas after all. Young people are out. Can I go with her? Unexpectedly, Nick volunteered. Yes, please. The medic shrugged. The driver continued to slip, and the car moved off. Thanks, buddy, shouted the driver Nick, and the doctor asked if he had changed his mind about accompanying the patient. Fortunately, his cell phone was in his pocket. He told Molly what had happened and asked her to go get a shovel. Nick's fears about Helen were justified. He didn't manage to get through to his daughter until the evening. God, what a horror, the girl exclaimed. And Mom is in Thailand with Dad Thomas. They'll be back in a week, but I can come. Come, daughter, but here's the thing, he hesitated. Anyway, I'm living in the village now. What are you doing there? Helen was stunned. Daughter, I'll see you later. Write down the address. After talking to her father, Helen was discouraged. What's so strange, though? Her father was able to find a woman and go to her in the village, and they spent Christmas together. This could only make Helen happy. Dad had found the strength to start a new life. He loves, is loved, and as a consequence, is happy. What more could a daughter want? Yes, but Dad said he was living there. Why not at his place? I'll come and see everything with my own eyes. Dad sounds like he's doing well, and if it's as good as I think it is, it's great. With a positive thought, Helen fell asleep. Helen managed to get a ticket only for January 4. The village was almost no different from her native village. Even the store building looked exactly the same as it had with the baby. The house where Helen's father now lived she found quickly. She knocked on the door not boldly and heard a vaguely familiar female voice. Come in. It's not locked. When the girl entered, she was stunned Molly. Helen exclaimed in surprise when she saw the head teacher. "Yes," Molly said, the woman embarrassed. "That's the way it is. Where's Daddy?" "Is Daddy coming?" There was an awkward pause. "And Helen." Nick shouted joyfully and kissed his daughter on both cheeks. "Daddy is touched," said the girl, hugging her father. "I missed you so much." "Me too," Nick admitted. Tears also appeared in the man's eyes. "But thank God, you are here. And please come to the table. And yes, guys, let's go to the table." Having coped, finally, with indignation, cordially invited Molly. "Dad, Molly, so are you together?" with a smile asked Helen. "Yes," simply replied Nick. "I hope you two are friends." "I'm thrilled," assured her daughter. "I have 4 parents now, you might say. Sorry, stupid joke. But why?" "A silly one that doesn't agree with their father's choice. I, for one, am very pleased." After the first glasses were knocked back and the first hunger was removed, Nick and his daughter started talking about everyday life. "How's Grandma doing?" Helen inquired. "Grandma will now need a nurse and a wheelchair." With a sigh, the father replied. "But even that's not the point. Sashka and his heroines don't want to take Wendy away. And why? Because they're assholes." Nick cut him off. "Besides, Uncle, as you know, always liked to drink. What a sick mother. And if his son doesn't need her, what about his Natasha? What kind of horror stories are you telling?" Helen shuddered, and this, daughter, is not horrors, but the harsh truth of life, philosophically remarked the father. "I hope I don't suffer the same fate in my old age." No, of course not. Wendy was conscious and already knew that if it hadn't been for her ex-son-in-law, there was no telling how things would have ended. "For 2 days, my ex-mother-in-law barely spoke about me. I mean, he saved my life. And I'm fine." "Wendy?" Nick smiled, squeezing her hand. "The main thing is that you get better." "Where's Sophia?" asked the older woman. And tears appeared in her eyes. "She doesn't ask about Sasha." A thought crossed my mind. So she realizes that her son doesn't need her. "Sophia has gone on vacation. How will she come back?" "She'll be back. She already knows everything." Really, her son-in-law reassured her. A nurse came into the room and said that the patient needed to rest. "Yes, of course," nodded Nick, and walked out. He visited Wendy every day, fed the old lady from a spoon, wiped down Molly's cooking, and ducked out after her without complaint. "You're a good man," the ex-mother-in-law said. And Nick smiled involuntarily. If a year ago someone had told Nick that his ex-mother-in-law would say those words, he would have twisted his finger at his temple. What was a year? A week. Nick was pleased to note that Wendy was on the mend. Her speech was no longer so frozen, but her leg paralysis was. As the doctor had assured her, was a matter of time. It was not only the doctor's merit, Molly assured her. A kind word is good for the cat. I think Wendy's quarrelsome nature was a kind of defensive reaction. But I think things are going to change now. Love and kindness works wonders. Hearing these words, Nick remembered what his future spouse had said. It looks like that's the way it's going to be. His Molly is rarely wrong at all. You're a very good man, Wendy repeated. Well, I'm flattered, Nick replied. Sentimental impulses. A few days later, Wendy was discharged. A couple of days before the discharge, Nick called his ex-wife, and Sophia assured him that she would take her mother back to her house. Admittedly, honestly, Corver was dreading this conversation. He himself could not understand the reason for his fear, but the fact remained. When Nick heard the voice of his ex-wife, he was surprised that he was absolutely not excited. They had a very nice conversation, and Nick even told his ex-wife that he would soon get married. Well done, Sophia said approvingly. I hope it's a worthy woman. You bet she is. I know her, the ex-wife inquired. You know, answered Nick with a grin. Molly, the vice principal. Oh, come on. Well, congratulations. You're gonna invite me to the wedding. Well, why not? The former spouses warmly said goodbye, and Nick felt as a mountain fell off his shoulders. Why, I wondered, was he afraid? As Parker gently coaxed his mother-in-law into the car. Wendy, are you comfortable? "I'm fine," replied the old woman, and suddenly said, "You know what I just thought about, and what is it?" Nick, who was sitting in the front seat, asked, "That both my sons-in-law are good people. Sonia has good taste after all." Both sons-in-law, as if on command, laughed deafeningly. Molly, who was sitting next to Wendy, also smiled. "We try," Thomas said cheerfully and started the car. And waiting for her at home were her daughter, granddaughter, and a holiday dinner. 3 years later, a few days before the defense of the diploma, Helen felt indisposed. Everything pointed to the fact that the future journalist is in an interesting position. When the test showed 2 stripes, Helen cried. "What are we crying about?" he asked. "After all, we wanted to get married. So the 3 of us are going to get married. That's all. Are you really happy?" "I'm really happy." 4 parents. What did Helen jokingly call them? They were happy too, and Wendy had nothing to talk about. "So I'm going to be a great-grandmother," she smiled. "Yes," nodded her daughter. "Oh my God, I'm going to be a grandmother. That's so exciting. It's like a baby boom," Nick said when he found out he was going to be a grandfather. A year ago, he became a father for the 2nd time. Almost all the money he earned on his regular shift was spent on Echo. And in the end, Nick and Molly became parents to an adorable little dumpling. So the baby-to-be has an aunt who's only 2 years older than him, or a little less. Nick led the eldest daughter to the altar, where the groom was waiting for her and thought what a lucky man he was. And Sophia, Molly, and Thomas were thinking in unison that one should not be afraid of change. Change isn't always a bad thing. They knew that.